once had 2 job interviews in North Carolina. I lived in New York at the time. I was taking the drive down there instead of flying to save money. My at-the-time job sucked, and the 2 jobs I was interviewing for could finally be a new start for me. They were corporate office jobs with a lot of benefits and good salaries. Plus, the weather would be much better than New York. I was driving down there on a Thursday night. I took off from work Friday because that's when the 2 interviews were. Since I had to work Thursday, I had to hit the road as soon as I was off work. I stopped home first to grab my suitcase and other stuff I was bringing. Then I said goodbye to my family and set off. It was a long 8+ hour drive ahead of me. My ETA was into the early hours of the morning, like 2 a.m. I was heading to a Comfort Inn. I drank like 3 cups of coffee my first few hours driving, and for a while I was good. But if you're already running on fumes, no amount of coffee is going to keep you going. I already didn't get much sleep the night before because I was stressing over these interviews, and after a long, busy day at work, the last thing I wanted to be doing was driving close to 9 hours. It was late at night now. I had about 2 hours left in the drive. There were very few other cars on the road this late at night on a weeknight. I was starting to feel really sleepy now, but I knew most of the drive was behind me. Suddenly, on the side of the highway, I saw a man in a suit standing there, not walking, not moving. He was facing my car, and as I looked at him as I passed, I saw his face turning to follow my car. I said out loud, "What the fuck?" It was truly bizarre. I almost contemplated turning around and asking if he needed a ride. He was just in the middle of the highway in a suit at like 12:30 at night. I came up with stories in my head about what may have happened, like maybe his girlfriend kicked him out of the car. I did this to keep my mind awake as I felt like I was drifting away. Then something beyond frightening happened. It was only maybe 10 minutes after I had seen that man that I saw another man on the side of the road coming up, also in a suit, also just standing there. What the hell was going on? I slowed down to pull to the side of the road and possibly ask if everything was okay, and maybe offer a ride. I don't know what I was thinking, but either way, when I was on the shoulder almost to a stop, I looked in the rearview mirror and then turned around completely, and that man was gone, as if he just disappeared. I stepped on the gas and got back on the road. I was losing it. I needed to stop for another coffee. I had about an hour and a half to go at this point. I stopped at the first pit stop I could find and bought a medium coffee. I drank a few sips, but as I was sitting in the rest area gas station parking lot, I spotted a man in a suit again, standing under a light post. It was the same man. This time I got a clearer view of his face. He looked like a middle-aged white man, short dark brown hair, clean-shaven, and a neutral expression. But it was the way he was once again facing my car that freaked me the fuck out. I turned the car on and got out of there without looking back. I wanted to complete this drive, but the coffee wasn't doing it. I felt like I was going to pass out behind the wheel. I wasn't going to make it, so I pulled off the highway and parked in a random parking lot. I angled the seat all the way down and I attempted to go to sleep. As tired as I was, I couldn't help but be scared in this empty parking lot. Scared that if I opened my eyes, I would see that man in the suit again. I was drifting into a sleep when something made me wake up again and open my eyes. Probably my mind playing tricks on me again. I looked around the outside of my car, scared I was going to see him. I looked out each window and then the front windshield, and it was clear. Then I looked in the rearview mirror, and I felt my soul leave my body for a second, because there I saw for a second a person in the back seat. I'm sure it was the man in the suit again, but I didn't look long enough because I opened the door, screamed, and fell backwards out of the car as I crawled back. I kept screaming until I finally got up, looked inside the car, and saw nobody. The back seat was empty. As I came to my senses, I realized my mind had been playing tricks on me all night. There is no man in a suit. I'm just completely exhausted and need to sleep. I got back in my car, my heart racing. Honestly now though, I was too awake to go to sleep. I turned the car back on and finished my coffee and banged out the rest of the drive. By the time I checked into the hotel and got to the room, I fell into the bed and passed out right away. The next day, my first interview was at 11 a.m., so I didn't get much sleep, but but I definitely felt somewhat recharged. However, the second my interviewer walked out to greet me, I froze up. My interviewer looked identical to the image of that man in the suit I kept hallucinating the night before. I know the interviewer noticed me freeze up. I could see it in his face. I tried to recover from this, but it set the tone for the rest of the interview, and I was completely nervous and out of it. I felt like I were in a dream. I left that interview with only an hour to get ready for my next one, and my next interviewer was a woman. I did much better with this one, because I actually got the job. I still work here and live in North Carolina now. My old therapist told me that she thinks the stress of mentally preparing for the interviews mixed with the lack of sleep caused me to hallucinate the main cause of my fear and stress. And so I hallucinated a man in a suit because that's who I pictured would be interviewing me. I feel like it doesn't sound too far-fetched, but it doesn't change how downright horrific the whole ordeal was. I was driving in Clearfield County, Pennsylvania one night to avoid traffic getting home. It was probably a little past midnight at this point, and the road was basically deserted, just the way I like it. I was listening to my usual podcast on the radio when a ding came from my car, alerting me that I was low on fuel. I put a pit stop into my Maps app for the nearest gas station, which was a little ways up the secluded road. About 5 minutes later, I pulled into the gas station on the right, the only parking lot for miles, as this road was basically nothing but woods on each side. The gas station was some generic, no-name gas station. I pulled next to the pump and noticed a man filling up the tank of his old beater pickup truck. He was looking at me as I walked past him and into the shop. Inside the shop, I bought a coffee and paid cash for my gas. When I came back outside, I noticed the man at the pump getting into his pickup truck, then driving away. After a couple of minutes of filling up the tank, I got back in my car and continued my drive. But not even a minute after leaving the station, I noticed on the side of the road on the grass was that same pickup truck from the gas station. It was just sitting next to the woods, turned off. Interesting. I kept driving, looking in my rearview mirror to see if it would turn on. Nope. I turned my podcast back on and continued my drive. A few minutes passed though, and I heard another ding come from my car. My dashboard screen showed that one of my tires was very low. I slowed down and started hearing a wobbling sound. I opened a window and knew right away I had a flat tire. I pulled to the side of the road and went to investigate. It was my rear driver's side tire. It was flat. I didn't think I hit anything. I would have felt it. The thought came to my head, what if that guy at the gas station slashed it? I took out my phone and was looking up the number for my roadside assistance company on Google. I heard the sound of a car or truck engine a little down the road behind me, but oddly I didn't see any headlights. It was just pitch black down there. Then the sound of the engine suddenly stopped, and it was quiet again. I went to my trunk to grab the SOS flashlight out of my toolbox my dad gave me one year as a Christmas present. I grabbed the long light rod, turned it on, and aimed it down the road. I saw the reflection of a truck's headlights, pulled on the side of the road about 200 feet away. It looked like that pickup truck again. I gasped and ran into the woods and ducked behind a big bush and tree. I took out my phone and called 911. I heard the sound of the truck down the road starting, and this time the headlights were on. I heard and saw through the bush the truck pull up next to my car, and then after a short moment of silence, a man yelled out, "You need some help?" I knew better than to answer. 911 picked up, and I whispered into the phone my location, and that someone slashed my tire, and that I think the person who did it was right here following me. The lady asked a bunch of standard questions, asking me to describe the man and his truck. I heard the truck door open and close. I told the lady over the phone that the man got out of his truck. She told me to remain hidden in the woods if I thought he was a threat. She asked if I could see if he was armed, and that's when the call disconnected. I had shitty cell reception here. I waited, hoping she would call me back. I'm sure she was trying to, but it wouldn't go through. I heard the sound of another passing car on the road. It was slowing down. Then I heard talking. It was the voice of another man. I crept closer to the edge of the woods to get a view of the road. I saw the man from the pickup truck standing next to this other stopped pickup truck in the middle of the road. He was talking to a person in the truck. I overheard the creepy man coming up with this fake explanation as to what was going on here. At that moment, I rushed into the road yelling, "Help, I don't know him." Both the man in the truck and the man who followed me looked over to me. I said to the man in the truck that this man slashed my tire and followed me here. The man in the truck's reaction was to look at the man with a disturbed look. The creepy man denied having done anything to my tires and claimed he's never seen me ever. At the same time, he hurried away to his pickup truck and started backing up until he cleared both of our vehicles, then drove off. The man in the other pickup truck got out and examined my flat, then offered me a ride into town. I told him I had police officers on the way, and sure enough, within a few minutes, a cop car with its lights on pulled up beside us. The man vouched for me when I told him about the other man. The police officer said he'd go down to the gas station and request to see the camera footage to see if it caught the pickup driver actually slashing my tire. The officer took my info, and he waited with me while I waited for the roadside assistance company. The tow truck driver gave me a ride to a shop where my dad picked me up. I never heard from that police officer, so I guess he didn't see anything in that video footage. It's scary how close I was to probably being abducted, though. It was the most horrific, haunting night of my life. It still sends shivers down my spine. I'm 28 years old, and my boyfriend Todd lives in a different state from me. We take turns visiting each other for the most part, but I'll usually end up visiting him more often because he has his own place, and I still live with my sister as a roommate. I was going up there for a week because it was winter break, and I had off because I'm a teacher, so I packed a lot. I was taking up there my crappy '09 Hyundai Sonata that I bought for my sister. Up where Todd lives, there was snow on the ground at this point, so the more north I got, the more careful I had to be driving, as that car was not really built for driving in the snow. It was on the later side, and unfortunately, it was starting to snow really hard now. There were blizzard warnings earlier, but both Todd and I agreed it would be better to try and beat the blizzard tonight rather than come tomorrow when the roads are full of snow. I started to accept the fact that I'd need to stay somewhere for the night, as I was still too far away, and the roads were getting bad. After stopping for a quick sandwich and some coffee at a small diner, the waitress who I was conversing with told me there's no way I should be on the roads right now. She recommended a few hotels and motels in the area. Then, after she walked away and I was left alone to finish up eating, a guy sitting at the bar spun in his chair and said to me there's a motel right up the road from here. When I put the motel's name into my phone, it said it was literally 5 minutes away. He said it was nice and cheap too, so I could just get a quick night's rest and get back on the road tomorrow. He really seemed to overhear my whole conversation with the waitress. He was also just sitting there at the bar with a beer. I'd never seen a person go to a diner just to drink. I didn't even know diners really served alcohol. But people up by Todd are a little weird. To me at least, because I grew up in the city. The man introduced himself as Toby, and I gave him a fake name saying I was Michelle. The rest of my time there, Toby was half facing me in his spinning bar stool, and I wasn't really looking to keep talking to him. So I looked away out the window to the snow until the waitress gave me my check. Then I said goodbye to them both as I left. In that half hour I spent in the diner, the snow accumulated at least an inch. I needed to get to that motel ASAP. I drove slow and was at the motel in a few minutes, maybe 10. There were a couple cars in the lot. It looked like a cheap motel, which was all I needed. I didn't want to waste money anyway. I went to the front desk and asked for a room for a night. I think I paid around $50, and the man at the desk handed me a key to one of the downstairs rooms. I walked back outside to my car to get my stuff and bring it inside. It was a tiny little room with tacky wallpaper, a queen-sized bed, and a red carpet. It was fine for the night. I tried to FaceTime Todd, but there was no reception at all here. The motel had Wi-Fi, but the password was probably at the front desk. So I put my shoes back on and hurried outside through the cold snow to the front desk. On my way there, I noticed there was a new car in the parking lot. I saw someone sitting inside of it, but I didn't take the time to look at who it could have been because realistically, who does that? The man at the front desk emotionlessly pointed to the free Wi-Fi sign with the password, and I typed it in. It took a minute, but I was connected. I went back to my room in a hurry, locked the door, and FaceTimed Todd. Even with Wi-Fi, the connection was so shitty. I could see his face, but it would freeze frame for like 5 seconds, and his voice would cut as well. I was able to at least communicate with him that I was safe in the motel. We decided to just text instead because the FaceTime wasn't really working. We were texting back and forth for a few minutes. Then I heard something come from the bathroom. I leaned forward and saw that the bathroom door was shut. Was it shut before? I didn't remember. I texted Todd that I heard something in the bathroom, and I started freaking out because I realized I ran to the front desk without locking the motel room door. He asked if the door locks by itself. I said, I don't think so, but now I also don't remember if I left the door cracked open or not. He told me to get up and check the door to see if it locks by itself when it closes, and to bring the key with me. I got up, put my shoes on, and saw that the door had a traditional twisting lock that moved with the knob from the inside or the key on the outside. I opened the door, looking to confirm this, but I noticed instantly the extra set of footprints leading to my door. These footprints led from that car that I saw someone sitting in to my door, and nobody was in that car anymore. I felt like screaming, but instead I closed the door to my room and ran to the front desk. I cried to the man that there's an intruder in my room. The front desk worker was not some huge jacked dude, so I don't think he was wanting to go confronting someone. He told me to wait in here, and he called someone. I thought he was calling the police, but instead he started speaking in some other language. I think he was calling a friend or associate. He hung up and told me again to just sit tight in here with him. I was standing in a position where I could see out the glass down to my room, and I let out a shriek when I saw the door to my room open and that man Toby from the diner walking to his car. We locked eyes for a second before he got in his car and backed out onto the unplowed roads, disappearing slowly down the road. The front desk worker's associate or friend or whoever it was arrived a while later. He was this big guy who didn't speak English. I don't know what they were saying to each other, but the front desk worker told me he would give me a different room free of charge to make me feel better. I didn't feel better, but I didn't have any other options of places to stay at this point. I took the new key, and the two men helped me move my stuff into the new room. Todd offered to come here, but I told him not to. It would be too long and too dangerous to drive in the dark and the snow. The next morning, the streets were somewhat plowed, enough to get through the rest of the drive to Todd's. Looking back, I don't like how that motel worker probably didn't call the cops because he didn't want his motel to get any negative attention. I called that diner to warn them about that man. I have no trust in strangers anymore. Not after this. I've been dating my girlfriend for 3 years now. I'll nickname her Nikki. It started innocently enough that I commented on one of her Instagram stories and we started chatting from there. Eventually I got her number and then Snapchat, and after a week we met in person. We started hanging out right after the holidays in January, and the thought of Valentine's Day was already coming up. It was nice having started talking to a girl around that time so that I wouldn't feel the dread of being alone on that annoying holiday. But as Valentine's Day approached and Nikki and I were a few dates in, she confided in me about a stalker situation she'd been dealing with. The man's name is Ben, and he's a guy a few years older than Nikki who happened to go to the same commuter college as her, met her in class for a group project, and followed her around campus a few times. She never involved police or anything, shockingly. Hearing that this guy found out where she lived, sent her a bunch of creepy texts which she ignored. She said she never blocked the number because she wanted to see how far he would go without getting the hints. When I gauged why she was choosing now to bring this to my attention, she said because he started reaching out to her again, specifically for Valentine's Day. As you can see here, he started ramping up the texting again as Valentine's Day approached. She continued to just ignore it and let the texts pile up, but he brought it to the next level when he left a box of Russell Stover chocolates on her doorstep. She knew it was from him because he texted her, "I hope you like the gift I left you." This was when she decided to put an end to it, and replied to him a long message which I won't share for her privacy, but in short, she said he needs help, and that she's seeing someone now, so to leave her alone. There are a number of ways to get someone's address this day and age, but she was scared that he got it by following her home one day. I did my best to make sure that she knew I wouldn't let him do anything to her. Well, fast forward maybe a few days, and Nikki sent me a concerning screenshot. It was a screenshot of some text from a fake number, asking if the guy she was seeing was me. Me as in, he wrote my name. Now I felt involved, and that made me feel moderately uncomfortable. To this point, all I've heard of this guy was that he was a very creepy and overly persistent texter, and potentially followed the girl I'm seeing home to her house. And now he's texting her on fake numbers bringing up my name. It was reaching the point where Nikki was close to calling the police if this didn't stop. I told her I'd go to the police station with her if he reached out one more time. Fast forward to Valentine's Day. It was on a Friday this year. Nikki and I went out to eat at a nice restaurant that sat on the water. We were at an outside table because the weather was nice. As we ate, we both took notice to a guy sitting on a bench outside of the dining area by the parking lot with a hat conspicuously pulled down his face as if he were hiding. Nikki made a joke, "What if that's Ben?" We laughed, but then he slightly tilted his head in our direction as we were looking at him, and then he quickly looked away, and seconds later he got up and walked away. We weren't laughing anymore. Now we actually questioned the chances of that actually being him. But after a few minutes, the conversation shifted to something else, and we enjoyed the rest of our time there. Afterwards, we wanted to keep hanging out. It was Valentine's Day after all, but her parents were home. I had the place to myself, so we went together back to my rental house. We were on the couch, and things were getting a bit more intimate. That's when Nikki pulled away from me and said, "What was that?" I heard it too. Something from outside in the backyard. "Want me to go check?" I asked. She nodded her head. I went out to the backyard patio, expecting to hear some animals scurrying off in reaction to my presence. I slipped on my slides and walked around the yard, looking around for anything that could have fallen over, and I found what made the noise. The entire stack of beach chairs that was leaning on the house had been knocked over. I don't know how that would happen unless someone or something bumped into them. There wasn't even the slightest breeze that night. I looked around at the bushes that encompassed our yard, and then, as if my brain immediately could spot something out of place, I locked in my vision on something tall in the bushes. My neck jutted forward as I literally tried to focus in and get a better look at what I was looking at. I stepped forward a few steps. I had an oh shit moment when I realized it was someone standing in the bushes. He had seen me notice him by this point. I said, "Who is that?" The guy started quickly coming out from the bushes, in a quick enough speed that I took it as a threat, as if he were about to charge at me. I took the chance to get him on the ground when he was still struggling with the bushes and twigs, and I yelled at him to stay down multiple times. I yelled Nikki's name until she came outside, and I said call the police. The guy on the ground struggled and tried to get loose a few times, but I more or less had him in a steady hold. When Nikki came outside while talking with the police, I asked her if this was the guy. She gasped and said, "Oh my God, yes." It was the Ben guy who had been harassing her. What's worse is at that moment, I realized he was wearing the same colored shirt that guy with the cap from earlier at the restaurant was wearing. Police got to the house and put him in cuffs. He would be charged with trespassing. And taking advantage of the moment, Nikki showed the officers all of the harassing and obsessive messages she'd been receiving from him. Since he was already being arrested, Nikki pressed charges for stalking and harassment, which the guy ultimately ended up paying a fine for and getting a misdemeanor. Nikki got an order of protection against him, and now if he ever contacts her again, he'll be arrested again. Ben was the ultimate creep. Thank God he's at least halfway smart enough to not have contacted her again, though. This happened 4 years ago. Valentine's Day was coming up. My boyfriend and I had planned a cute dinner like what most couples do. As we were walking into the restaurant, there's this couple outside weirdly staring at my boyfriend and I. I slightly shove my boyfriend's arm as we get inside, and he gives out his name to be put in the wait line. The host said it would be a 45-minute wait, and she said she would text us when our table was ready. My boyfriend said let's go to the mini golf across the street, so we're walking back to his car. The lady from the couple stood up and held up her hand, introducing herself as Mrs. Gretty. I found it really weird and looked at my boyfriend. The lady still had her hand out. I wasn't trying to be rude, I gave her a shake. The lady went on to explain that her and her husband think we're a great-looking couple, and they're photographers and think we would make great photos and to follow them to the studio, as she believes the wait time will be long. She goes on to say that she has no card on her, but their place was a 5-minute drive away and they could take us there as well. Red flags are going off, and my boyfriend politely declines and lets her know we have things to do. The look was still one of the most haunting looks ever, as she smiled and sat down next to the husband. As we get in the car, I tell my boyfriend how creepy that interaction was, and how the husband didn't even say a word. As we enter the mini golf place, we were pretty surprised to find it empty. We laughed the situation off, but in reality, I'm still creeped out. As this place is not really huge, you can see the front door on all the levels. So as we're on our 5th round, I hear the entrance bell ring. I turn to look, and my heart sinks. It's the same lady with her husband. She seems to look around, and then as we make eye contact, she gives me the creepiest smile. I let my boyfriend know, and he turns to look as they're getting their things. I tell my boyfriend I'm uncomfortable and we should just go wait in the car, as 15 minutes have passed already, so it wouldn't be much longer. He agrees, and we turn around, and they're right behind us, giving us the widest smiles. "Crazy how we both came to this spot," said Mrs. Gretty. This time the husband says, "We should face each other, Gretty versus Rod." My boyfriend's heart sank in that moment, as his last name is Rods. We politely declined, not wanting to know how they knew that information, and we said we have to go. Both of their smiles faded as we rushed out of there. I told my boyfriend we should just call it a night and go back to his place since it was closer than mine. Plus, my parents wouldn't be home until Sunday morning. He said we would go after dinner and not let some random weird couple ruin the night for us. We waited about 15 minutes in his car, talking about how weird the situation was, as he gets a text from the restaurant saying they're ready for us. We eat dinner, and he insists on paying today since it's Valentine's Day, as we usually split the bill. He goes to the bathroom, and as I'm waiting, I thought I saw that lady peeking out from around a corner. I convinced myself it was just in my head. My boyfriend gets out and is ready to go. Now, to get to his place, you have to take this long road surrounded by trees. As we start the drive, we notice a car following behind. I let my husband know, and we head into a CVS parking lot. I have to use the restroom, and since it was going to be a drive, we both get out and go. When we come out, we don't see that car that was potentially following us anywhere, so we make our way to his house. You know that road I talked about earlier being surrounded by trees? Well, while we're driving on it, we're like 3 to 5 minutes onto this road. We heard a loud pop, and my boyfriend stopped his car. His 2 front tires had popped. He put 2 and 2 together and ran to the car and said, "Get out, there's not much more time before they get here." He cut his engine and turned off the lights and locked the door. I was so scared and confused, not knowing what was going on. I told him we should wait in the car. He quickly got me and we ran into the woods. He told me to shush. We were hiding behind some trees and bushes. While we hid, he called the cops and quickly explained where we were at and what was happening. The operator asked to stay on the line and the cops would be here in a couple minutes. He said he couldn't stay on the line and hung up. As we stayed laying down, we heard a car engine coming up. My boyfriend said to lay flat as he did too. We heard the engine to the car stop, and we heard the familiar voice of Mrs. Gretty, if that was even her real name. She yelled, "Shit, we took too long." We heard a car door close, and then a car quickly speed away. We stayed down until the cops got there, which was about 2 minutes later. We explained the situation and got told we would be contacted if something came up. I called my sister to come pick us up, and he called the tow truck for his car. 4 years later, nothing has come up on it, and we never found out what they wanted or who they were. We're now married with a crazy story to tell our kids. During the fall 2018 semester, I was doing some online classes through a pretty prestigious college, but I knew that I would transfer to my hometown 4-year university for the winter semester. I still wanted to make some new friends though, so that I wouldn't feel alone, and maybe along the way it would be nice to meet someone to date, which is what happened. I met this girl through Tinder. She was really cool and we had a lot in common. Long story short, we started dating and we had a lot of fun together. She wasn't from my hometown, and I had noticed that after she came back from Thanksgiving break, the way she behaved and her attitude had changed. She was always on the more sarcastic side, but now it just seemed mean. For example, the playful, flirtatious teasing had become way more aggressive. There was no physical harm, I should say that. It was just the kind of teasing that shouldn't be happening in a relationship. I just brushed it off as stress due to finals approaching. She eventually went back home for winter break. We always found ways to stay in touch every day, such as text, Snap, and occasional FaceTime either once or twice a week. Once the winter semester started, I moved into an apartment because the dorms didn't seem that fun, and I had found something nice that was surprisingly cheap. Literally the night of the first day of classes, we decided to break up. Like I said, she was from a different state, and she was having a lot of trouble being away from home because she missed her family, friends, and pets a lot. Besides me and her roommate, who she didn't really get along with, she barely knew anybody in town. She was just such a shy person, and that's not a bad thing, but like I said, she didn't have a lot of friends to surround herself with, so she just wanted to be by herself all the time. So it was a nice exit out without having to be the one that did the dumping, because that kind of stuff just gives me too much stress and anxiety. A few weeks went by, and each day I felt a little less sad because when I looked back on the relationship, there were a bunch of issues that I had overlooked. It was the week leading up to Valentine's Day, and I was kind of sad because I had some fun things planned that I wanted to surprise my girlfriend with. I decided that maybe for that week, I would reactivate my Tinder account, really to see if I could get a match and possibly hang out with someone on the holidays so I wouldn't be alone because most of my friends had their own boyfriends and girlfriends. I did about 2 days before the holiday, and I got some matches after a few hours of having the app. I chatted with most of them and asked what their Valentine's Day plans were. And not to my surprise, they were all going out to bars. Personally, that lifestyle isn't really my thing, it just doesn't seem that fun to me. But I always use it as a last resort, and I wasn't that desperate. Yet. I eventually started texting with a girl named Alex, who wasn't into that stuff either. She would rather stay in and watch movies, which is what I would rather be doing too. She even had the same major as one of my best friends, and was taking some of the classes he was taking. But she didn't know if they had classes at the same time since they had just started and she was trying to figure out everyone's names. The best way to describe Alex is that she had shoulder-length blonde hair, cute glasses, freckles, and bright blue eyes. After texting for about an hour, I got her Snapchat and we moved the conversation there. I asked if she would want to hang out on Valentine's Day, and she was down. So it was Valentine's Day 2018, which had fallen on the Thursday of the week. Luckily, I didn't have any Friday classes, and Alex said she would skip her Friday morning class so we wouldn't feel pressured to end the night so early. The first part of the night went pretty smooth. We got some McDonald's, saw a movie, and then walked around the downtown area for a while. To spare you the details, we eventually went back to my apartment and had sex, and to be honest, everything went great. She asked if she could spend the night because it was snowing out, and her place was about a 10-minute walk away. So of course I told her she could stay. We eventually fell asleep around 1 a.m. I'm a pretty light sleeper, especially when there's someone else in the bed with me. Around 3 a.m., Alex woke me up as she was getting out of the bed, but I didn't make her aware that she woke me up. It was pretty dark in the room, but I could see that she was walking towards the bathroom. She turned the light on and shut the door so that it wouldn't seep into the bedroom. I was very tired, so I just went back to sleep. I awoke again around 5:30 a.m., and to my surprise, Alex wasn't in the bed next to me. I turned to see if she was still in the bathroom, but I couldn't see the outline of the light, so that meant it was turned off. I wasn't in too much of a shock yet. I was just curious as to where she was. So I sat up and grabbed my phone off my bedside table. I didn't have any text from her saying that she had left, but I was able to see that the clothes she'd been wearing earlier were still on the ground next to mine. So she was still here somewhere. I then heard a creak come from the other side of the bedroom. I could see that Alex was just standing in the corner, back facing toward me. I was really freaked out. I quietly called out her name and asked if she was okay, but there was no response. I turned on the lamp I had on the bedside table. It didn't create too much light, but there was enough. I got out of bed and walked over to her. She was just standing there, not even moving. I was so creeped out, but I wanted to see what was going on. I gently placed my hand on her shoulder and said her name again, and there was no response. There were 10 seconds of silence, and right as I was about to say her name one more time, she turned around at an inhuman speed and started screaming like a maniac and hitting me. It wasn't the hardest of hitting, but I'm kind of a skinny guy, so it hurt a bit. The scariest part is there was no emotion on her face at all. I backed up and fell over onto my bed, and she followed me, still screaming and hitting me. After about 30 seconds of this happening, she ran over to her clothes, grabbed them, and ran out of my apartment. I got off the bed and ran to my front door, which was left wide open, and she was gone. I shut it and locked it. I then noticed there was a horrible smell coming from the bathroom. The door was shut, and when I opened it, the horrible stench came out. I turned on the light and found the room in a mess. The shower curtain was ripped off, my medicine bag had been thrown on the ground, and my floor was wet. The worst part was that she defecated and smeared it on the mirror. I called the police immediately, and they sent an officer to my place. They asked if they could see her Tinder and Snapchat profile, but of course, both had been deleted. I only had one picture of her that she sent on Snapchat, and I had screenshotted it because it was a cute looking picture, but she was using a Snapchat filter in the picture. Sadly, there was not really much police could do except take a report and keep an eye open for her in the area. They advised me to have a friend sleep over later that night in case she would try to break in, which is what I did. I called one of my best friends, Rob. He was the one who had the same major as Alex. He came over later that night and I told him the whole story. One of the classes she said she was taking, that my friend was also taking as well, was a pretty small class that only met twice a week. I showed Rob the picture I had, and when I asked Rob if he knew her, he said he had never seen her in class. Rob and I watched a movie and fell asleep around 12 a.m. I awoke around 3 a.m. to find someone trying to open the front door from the other side. After letting it happen for about a minute, it then stopped. I walked over and looked out the peephole, but nobody was there. Nothing has happened since, but it still really freaks me out. If you want to listen to these stories plus some exclusive ones on your favorite apps, all of them are available to listen to on Spotify, Apple Music, and Amazon Music. Just click the link in the description or at the end of the video. There's an abandoned motel called the Royal Hawaiian Motel. It's been abandoned for, I'm pretty sure, well over a decade. I do a lot of solo urban exploration, sometimes at night. The Royal Hawaiian Motel is located in Baker, California, and during the day it gets scorching hot, too hot to be walking around with my backpack. So I chose to go to the motel during the night. It was very easy to get to. I parked on the side of the road and walked over. There really was no fence or anything to hop over, and there was no security. It was one of the easier structures to get to that I've explored for sure. In the back was a really deep pool with a ton of graffiti. I shined my flashlight up at the actual motel, and I noticed half of the upstairs room's doors were slid open slightly or just completely shattered. Kinda creepy looking, but also expected since the place had been abandoned for so long. Of course, other people have explored there. A part of the motel also looked like it had been engulfed in flames and partially burnt down. I looked around the outside for a little while. It was late at night, so there were no sounds of nearby passing traffic. Besides the sounds of my shoes stepping over various pieces of debris, at one point my blood ran cold when I heard a voice from somewhere in the vicinity. It sounded like a female's voice. My first instinct in these scenarios is to assume it's some kind of security worker or somebody who may cause trouble for me, so I typically tend to walk out of sight and hide. That's what I did. I ran to one of the other rooms on the ground level and turned off my flashlight. I waited just a minute, and after hearing nothing, I turned it back on. I looked around this little room I was in, and the walls were littered with graffiti. There was only one piece of furniture in here. It was a little dresser with like 4 drawers on it, and then some dusty, dirty old mattress on the floor. I wondered if homeless people would come and sleep here, but honestly, it's just so far away from any real civilization that I doubted it. I left the room and continued around the motel. I would peek inside every little opening on the ground floor below the overhead walkway for the upper level rooms. Each room was pretty similar to the last, with different miscellaneous graffiti and writings on the walls and old dilapidated furniture. Then I heard a crash type sound from above, like something falling over. I felt my heart skip a beat. I went back outside and pointed my flashlight up at the walkway above, at the broken glass doors. I felt a rush as I decided to go up there and check out the rooms. What I felt like deep down was that there was an animal in one of the rooms, but there's always that chance that you run into other explorers or perhaps a homeless person in places like this. I made my way upstairs and peeked into each room that I passed. They were all similarly furnished, with junk, debris, old mattresses, and odd pieces of old furniture. As I walked further down the walkway, a banging sound became audible. It got louder as I continued to walk. It was a consistent, slow banging, like thump, 2 seconds, thump, 2 seconds, thump. Someone was here. I approached the door to the room I was positive that it was coming from. As I got closer, it stopped. Uh-oh, maybe they heard my footsteps. I announced to whoever was in there that I'm just an explorer and I mean no harm. I peeked into the room with the flashlight now off. It was almost pitch black in there, but I'm 50% certain I saw the shape of a person a little further into the room by the back wall. The room smelled like straight feces. I pulled my head out from the room to look down at my flashlight and turn it on, but in a careful position to not point the light right into the room right away. I aimed it down at first at the floor, and then peered into the room again, and slowly pointed the light into the room. And I saw 2 pale bare feet approaching me fast. In a muscle jerk reaction, I pointed the light up more to fully reveal this woman with a bloodied forehead and yellow guck on her mouth which was hanging open. It was a sight from a nightmare. I was out of there so quick. I heard the woman screaming as I was running away, and her screams didn't get much further away, which told me she was chasing after me. I ran down the stairs and back outside. I ran the entire way back to my car. I wasn't followed this far. I called one of my good friends, George, who's also into urban exploration. I had invited him to come with me originally to this place, but he was unable to. I told him what just happened. We came to a weird and disturbing agreement that the thumping I was hearing was that woman banging her head on the wall, hence why her forehead was so bloody. When I asked if I should call the police, kind of just thinking out loud, he said definitely not, as I'd be admitting to trespassing. I actually drove around the immediate area by the Taco Bell and the few stores in the area, looking for a payphone so I could anonymously call the police about this deranged, dangerous woman. But obviously payphones are really a thing of the past, so it was just a pointless effort. What I ended up doing was calling the non-emergency number and reporting the deranged woman, but also claiming I was not the one to find her, rather I heard someone else had run into her. I was as vague as possible, and I hung up. Because I didn't want to stick around there, I don't know if the police eventually went to investigate, but whatever was wrong with that woman, she should have been in a psych ward or something. In all of my years of exploring, I'd never encountered anything like that. A few years ago, I lived in a small town. My family decided to move us 4 hours away to get away from all the drama. While my parents were out of town picking out houses, I brought my friend over and called up my cousins to take a little road trip. The place I wanted to go was pretty much off limits, but we were daredevils and wanted to experience something scary. We picked a place that was 2 to 3 hours away called Bryce Hospital. This place was supposedly haunted due to the history of it. It was a psychiatric facility where they would keep mentally ill people. There were rumors about how some of the patients were mistreated and tortured. As the population declined, they eventually shut down. Over the years, the building began rotting and succumbing to nature. We decided to leave around 11 p.m. so we could make it there by 2 a.m. The car ride was pretty fun, and we were all very pumped to see what we would find. We arrived around like 2:43 a.m. and stopped at the beginning of the dirt road that led to it. We sat there for a few minutes, contemplating if we should really do this or not, because we already had a bad feeling. After 10 minutes of staring at a dark road, we decided to go on. As we went down the road, it felt like it would never end. The grass was fully grown and there were branches everywhere. It was pitch black and we could barely even see the road. We finally made it to the building, and once we did, we all just stared in amazement. It was huge. The roof was rotted off and vines were growing all over the walls. In the middle of the parking lot, or what was once the parking lot, had a giant old water fountain that also had vines growing from the sides. It was so dark we could only see what the headlights illuminated. We turned the car off and got out. We began walking into the building, and the first thing I noticed was pentagrams sprayed all over the walls. We kept walking farther in, and made our way up the stairs, which was very hard considering they were practically non-existent. We climbed a ladder and got onto what was left of the roof. We looked around, and noticed a light in the front of the building. It looked like a phone light. We called out, but nobody answered, and the light vanished as quickly as it appeared. My cousin told us to follow him into another room so he could make sure we were safe, but I had a terrible feeling. I wandered off into another room that was right beside the room they were in. I looked around and saw old mattresses and more graffiti. I heard my cousins talking when all of a sudden, I heard a faint sound. It was like someone threw a rock at the window of the room I was in. I didn't think anything of it and kept looking around. I met back up with my cousins and friend. We decided to go to the basement to check it out. Once we got down there, we had to take a break because it was difficult getting to the bottom due to the stairs being smashed. We sat there catching our breath until we heard a voice from the back of the room. We all paused, looking at each other. I was too afraid to move, fearing whatever was in there would come after me. My cousin walked back there slowly and shined his light around. As the light reached the far end of the room, he saw someone squatted, looking towards the wall. My cousin began backing up slowly with the light still on the guy. Once he got back to where we were, he lifted us out and began pulling himself out. Once we were out, he yelled to the man, asking if he was okay. The man turned around and stared blankly at us. There was a moment of silence before the man let out wild screams. He began running towards us. We all started screaming and running away. We had no idea where to run, but ended up climbing out of the window. We ended up in the woods behind the building. I remember running and screaming because I heard the man right behind me. My cousins were far ahead of me, and I saw their flashlights slowly fading. I ran into so many trees that my entire body started to ache. I finally caught up to them in a clearing. We found a trail and started trying to find our way back to the car, but we ended up going the wrong direction for an hour and decided to turn back and try the other direction. It was a grueling way back, but we finally saw the building again and sighed with relief knowing we weren't far from the car. As we approached the car, we heard rustling in one of the bushes by the building, and like before, a rock flew out and hit my friend. We saw the man emerge from the bush, and we had to make a run for the car. As we were running, the man was a decent length behind us to where we could open the doors and lock them once we got in. We started up the car, and when we did, the headlights turned on, only to show the man running towards us. He started banging on the windows with a glass bottle. We put it in drive and took off out of there. The whole entire time we were heading home, we sat in silence. I think we all felt the same sense of shock. My body was shaking. After that night, we never had any interest in urban exploring ever again. This happened in the countryside of Georgia. I was 15 at the time with my brother Seb, who was 18. Seb was big on exploring creepy places, and he somehow heard of this huge abandoned house not far from us from someone he knew. I guess he didn't want to explore it alone, so one day he brought me along with him to go check it out. Seb parked the car in a rather hidden location, covered by a bunch of trees. The house property wasn't visible from here. We'd have to walk down this concrete road that clearly hadn't been touched in forever. There were giant cracks with grass and weeds growing through it just about everywhere. All the grass around the road was overgrown, almost overtaken with weeds as well. Suddenly we noticed a woman down the road walking behind us in our direction. I asked Seb what we should do, and he said to just play it cool. If we started to run, it would look suspicious. The woman was walking with both her hands folded behind her back, as if she were going for a relaxing stroll. We kept walking at our regular pace, maybe picking it up a bit just slightly. I turned around once more, and she was much closer now, and I could see a smile on her face. She was looking back at me. Then she said, "Lovely day today, isn't it?" My brother and I simultaneously responded, "Yeah." She kept walking behind us, getting closer and closer. Then, as she was almost right on top of us, with her hands still folded behind her back, she said, "I have to go to bed now." Seb and I looked at one another with confused looks. We both picked up the pace now without saying a word to each other. We just saw in each other's faces that it was time to speed up and get away from this woman. My brother turned around one last time and said, "Have a great day, ma'am." We stayed in the speed walk pace for a while, and the next time we turned around, that woman was gone, completely off the road. That meant she must have taken off into the woods, which was incredibly creepy. It was absolutely a chilling start to this little field trip. We made it to the house. It was noticeably deteriorated. There were vines of ivy growing up certain parts of the walls. Some of the glass windows were shattered, meaning it had been explored before. And that's exactly how we entered the house, through one of the broken windows. We climbed in, making sure not to cut ourselves on any broken glass. Right from the start, surprisingly, there was a lot of stuff left behind, like all the furniture, albeit it looked a little worn out, all the wall decor, the little decorations on the coffee table. Even when we went into the kitchen and checked the fridge, there were food items left behind. Very rotten food items. Opening that fridge was like getting smacked in the face with the smell of death. After checking the whole first floor, we went down to the basement. The basement, like the first floor, was still completely furnished, although down here was a lot messier. There were a ton of things like loose sheets of paper and garbage spread out on the floor. The carpet was a faded blue color. There was a little bit of light that came into the room through the windows at the top of the walls. And then we heard a noise from upstairs. A distinct thump. We both just froze like statues, waiting for any kind of noise again. Within a few seconds, we chalked it up to just being a noise of an old, deteriorating house. There wasn't much else to see in the basement, so we went back up to the first floor, and the only place left to check was the upstairs. At the top of the stairs, from what I remember, was the bathroom directly in front of the stairs, and then to the left was a small hallway that led to an open door, and then the hallway cut left. I don't remember what was to the right, but I'll tell you why in a second. Seb and I went left and into the first doorway. It was a bedroom. A decently sized bedroom, but it didn't seem like the master bedroom. There was a double bed in there, and an antique-looking dresser. There were some old articles of clothing left behind in the dresser, nothing I wanted to touch. Seb left the room first, and then he said my name, in a very concerned, scared-sounding tone. I looked up at him, and he was looking down the hall. I stepped into the hall, and saw what he was looking at. There was that woman from earlier, standing in front of the bed in another bedroom at the end of the short hallway. She was still smiling like before. She opened her mouth and said, "Do you want to see what's behind my back?" My brother screamed, "Fuck you," and he pushed me to start running. We both made a beeline for the front door and sprinted to the outside. I couldn't help but look back at the house, at the upstairs windows, expecting her to be at one of them, but she wasn't. I also just had to make sure she wasn't chasing after us. We kept running until we were out of sight from the house, and then we kept running some more, even though my cardio sucked and I was out of breath. When we finally made it back to the car, I gagged, trying to throw up from exhaustion. We got in the car and Seb drove us home. The whole ride, we couldn't stop theorizing what it was that just happened. We said it might have been some loony woman off her meds or escaped from a mental facility or something. Maybe she was living in that abandoned house. But even explaining all of that away, the big question is, what did she have behind her back? And was she holding it that whole time she was walking behind us? So many questions that will never be answered.
This happened when I was 15 years old. My best friend Anthony wanted me to come over for the night since his parents would be gone all weekend. I rode my bike over and put it in his backyard before letting myself in through his back door. We played basically every video game he had, from FIFA all the way to Call of Duty, with popcorn and other junk food spilled out all over the floor. As the night progressed, we moved from video games to watching half a movie and getting bored to doing prank calls at close to 10 o'clock. Anthony made a few calls to different pizza places. When it was my turn, I just dialed a few random numbers in hopes to get someone at their house. On, say, my fourth attempt, I finally reached somebody. A guy with a deep and rough voice picked up, answering with a yeah instead of a hello. Anthony's laughing in the background made me stumble with my words mid-sentence, ultimately cracking up into laughter. I had never done a prank call, so I sucked at it. The guy on the other end was silent. I regained a straight face and tried to continue with the call. It went something like this. Sir, would it be alright if I borrowed one of the wheels from your car? What's your name, kid? My name is Bob. Really? You sure it's not Anthony? It hit me like a brick. I looked up at Anthony, whose face was noticeably full of fear. I hung up the phone, not wanting to be on the line with whoever that was for another second. Anthony, who the hell was that? I asked him. I don't know, he told me. Does your caller ID info display your name or something? No, it shows my dad's name. We hopped on the computer and did some research, trying to figure out how it was possible to get someone's name through their phone number. It didn't make sense how he could get Anthony's name so quickly. He was way too young at the time to be on any of those personal information sharing websites. We ended up asking a question on Yahoo Answers, since no one had a similar experience. The question turned up no answers. I suggested he call his dad, but he said he wasn't supposed to have anybody over for the weekend, so he didn't want to call. We planned on sleeping in the living room, so we just resumed watching the movie that we hadn't finished from earlier. Right after the phone call had left my mind, me and Anthony looked at each other when we heard his front storm door opening, and then the doorknob to the front door began to turn. It only was able to turn about halfway before the lock restricted it. Anthony turned off the TV, and I went over to the window to see who it was. I spread the blinds open. There was a tall guy standing outside. He noticed the blinds moving and turned to look at me. I practically threw the blinds back into place. Me and Anthony hid in the kitchen, listening for any more noises. We heard the sound of the gate to the backyard opening, as it was right outside the kitchen window. "God damn it," I said. "I forgot to shut the back door." Anthony urged me to run and shut it. I made it to the hallway leading to his back door, and froze. There was a silhouette standing outside the back door. I don't think he noticed me, but he was surely looking into the house. He opened the door and stepped inside. I tiptoed to the kitchen and motioned for Anthony to follow me upstairs. We made it to his room as quietly as possible, pulling the door shut to avoid making any noise. We crawled under his bed. He had cloth covering the bottom of his bed, so you couldn't see anything under it unless you actually moved the cloth. The doors downstairs all opened, each one getting closer to the stairs. Thumps finally began up the stairs, and he was right outside the door now. The door to the room opened. I could hear Anthony's breathing. It was too loud. Footsteps moved over to the closet, and then the closet opened. I could hear the coat hangers being slid around as the fabric of the jackets and coats rubbed against each other. Footsteps moved over to the bed and stopped. I felt like my heart was about to explode out of my chest. Anthony's breathing was too loud. I had to cover his mouth with my hand. Nothing but silence in the room now. We laid still for so long, I almost thought he wasn't even in the room anymore. I moved my hand away from Anthony's mouth and whispered in his ear, "You think we can make a run for it?" He was about to answer when the most disturbing, memory-haunting scream I'd ever heard filled my ears as Anthony was seemingly dragged out from under the bed. I crawled out and saw him struggling with the man. I desperately looked around for anything to use as a weapon. I settled with the screwdriver sitting on his nightstand. I hurried over to the man and drove the screwdriver into his back. He let go of Anthony as he let out a scream of agony, giving us time to get the hell out of the house. Running onto the road would give away our position too easily. It would take too long to make it to his neighbor's house. We dove for the tree line in the woods and took cover behind a bush, watching the house. The back door opened as the man stepped outside, looking around the backyard. He then looked out to the woods. I felt his eyes pass me as he scanned through the tree line. It seemed that it was too dark for him to see us. Then, he turned his head back in our direction. I ducked behind the bush. "Joe, he's coming." "What?" "Dude, get up, we gotta run." He was right. The man was approaching us fast. How could he have seen us? We ran through the woods with the leaves crunching under us, giving away our position. When Anthony tripped over something, I crouched down with him, hoping we had run far enough. Not even 20 seconds later, oncoming footsteps from the direction we were running from came fast. They slowed down only 2 trees away from us, as we lay face down in the leaves. Moments later, the footsteps take off in another direction. We waited until we could no longer hear them, and took off back in the direction of the house. While running, over the sound of leaves crushing and my heavy breathing, I could swear I heard leaves crushing from behind us. We made it back to his backyard, into his house, and this time remembering to shut the back door. We were now able to call the police. Anthony stayed on the line with them, while I patrolled the back windows making sure nobody was out there. It was so dark though, I couldn't see anything. So I did something that seems stupid today. I turned on his backyard lights, and immediately in the distance, over by the woods, I saw him, standing in front of a big tree. He turned off back into the woods and disappeared out of sight. That was the last time me or Anthony ever saw him. I would be lying if I told you we heard the occasional knocks at our windows or something cliche. No, that was it. 5 years have passed and nothing has happened. Do I wonder if it was somehow linked to the prank call? Maybe. Does it make sense? Not really. But yeah, this was the story of how me and my still best friend Anthony almost died during a break-in. Me and my wife have had our fair share of arguments, but there was this one night that she wouldn't stop bitching over the stupidest shit. It got to the point where I forgot to put the toilet seat down, and she lectured me at the top of her lungs with an ear-piercing voice that I just couldn't take it anymore. I called my buddy Paul up, and he told me I could crash there for the night. I was exhausted, and I didn't need to deal with my crazy wife at the time. Paul had a huge house, which was another thing my wife always yelled at me about, how all my friends have nicer houses than us. We had a few beers and had a bro chat. He suggested I stay there for as long as I needed, but I assured him I'd only stay for one night. I didn't want to be a bother. I slept in one of his guest bedrooms. Surprisingly, he has 3 guest bedrooms, but has only needed to use one of them so far. He never uses the other 2 bedrooms, and only plans on using them for a party or something like that. All 3 guest bedrooms in the house are lined up next to each other, while Paul's bedroom is across the hall. It's a weird setup for sure, but it let me hear strange noises coming from the next room over. I assumed it was Paul doing something in there, but it quickly got annoying, so I decided to just walk over and see what was going on. I tried the doorknob, but it was locked. I cracked the door open to Paul's room and asked him what the noise was. He was already in bed as well. He didn't hear anything. Upon asking why he kept the door locked, he told me he always keeps those 2 doors locked as he keeps some personal belongings in there. I warned him that there was a strange noise coming from the room, and he told me to just go back to sleep, and if I continued to hear it, come back to him. So I did. I went back to bed, and the noises were completely gone now. A half hour passed. I was starting to drift off to sleep at last, when I heard the slightest tap on the wall. It came from the other side, the next room over. It was followed by a faint voice. I jolted up from the bed and ran back to Paul's room. This time, he took me seriously. He got the key to the 2 doors and unlocked the one next to mine. We stepped inside and felt a breeze hit us on the way in. The window was completely open, along with the closet. We dug through the entire room. The bed had marks on it as if someone were on it. The closet was full of empty bags, and his valuable belongings that were in his drawers were gone. Paul suddenly ran out to the hallway. I was confused at first, but I caught on quickly as he was checking the other room. I was right by his side as he unlocked the door to the 3rd guest bedroom, and the first thing we saw was a black figure jumping out the window onto the patio roof. Paul was about to jump out after him, but we instead both ran outside through the back door in hopes to catch him. He was gone already. It's a good thing we didn't catch him though, because what we found in this room was far more disturbing. The white sheets on the bed were stained with blood. The closet had the butcher knife he had been missing sitting on the floor with a few blood spots on it. And of course, all of his valuable belongings were gone. These people, most likely homeless and likely dangerous drug addicts, were living in his home for a little more than a week. He had even mentioned something about how fast his food goes, and yet he's so skinny when we were drinking. That made a lot more sense now. As far as we know, none of them were ever caught. I remember it like it was yesterday. It was my first sleepover, an important part of my childhood. It was my good friend. His name was Jordan. We were 10 years old. He had a huge basement where we could play video games until 1 in the morning and then sleep on the couches. Skipping the teeth brushing like two little rebels, we went straight to trying to get some sleep on the couches. I fell asleep with ease. I woke up at some unknown time. I realized the TV was still on, with a blank screen. It was giving off a very dim light, but it was enough to notice something in the far corner of the basement by the stairs. It was some tall object. I didn't know what it was, and I can't really describe how it looked. All I know is it almost reached the ceiling. The sound of the TV turning off and the small amount of light vanishing was almost enough to make me start screaming. I shut my eyes and just laid there motionless. I don't even remember falling back asleep. All I remember is waking up to a sudden and horrid screaming coming from upstairs. It was Jordan's mom. He woke up as well, and we looked at each other before sprinting upstairs to his parents' room. His mom was sitting there crying as his dad was turning the room upside down looking for what she saw. He barged out past us looking for anybody in the house, but there was nobody in the house. No signs of entry or exit. I'm still friends with Jordan today, and the last time I've brought this up, he said his mom doesn't like to talk about it, but she did once admit she saw a tall, dark figure standing by their bedroom door. I'm undoubtedly sure that's what I saw in the basement that night.
There's this abandoned mansion in Toronto that came up in a group chat among my friends. We saw pictures of it through a mutual friend who had recently gone to explore there. It looked immaculate based on the pictures, and we were intrigued to go check it out. It was 10 miles north from us, so the drive wasn't bad. The mansion sat on a big open grass plain, with pine trees and other foliage surrounding the perimeter of the property, acting as a natural fence or just a wall of privacy from the outside. My friends, who I'll call Chad and Brad for this story, followed close behind me as I led the way up the large gravel driveway towards the front of the unfinished house. By the looks of it, construction on the structure had been abandoned when it was near completion, as the outside foundation seemed to be finished. Our mutual friend who found out about the place had told us that he hopped through a back window that was left unlocked, so that's what we looked for. The unlocked window turned out to be in the kitchen, right over the counter, so one at a time we squeezed through the window, crawling onto the counter and then down to the ground. First impressions in the kitchen, almost immaculate, minus a few of the cabinet doors sprawled out on the floor as if they had yet to be installed, and just things like sheetrock boards laying around. But everything seemed new, and it was a shame the construction was abandoned. The three of us kind of went our own directions in the house. I went towards the living room, which again was almost pristine. It was a huge room that transitioned into the dining room, and then from there, a wide hallway with at least 10 different doors. My friends were already checking out some of the rooms in this hallway. I peeped into each room and realized most of them were bedrooms. At the end of the hall was a 3-door garage. The last door in the hall before the garage was the basement. I called to Brad and Chad that I was checking out the basement. I got an acknowledgement from at least one of them. The basement had this bizarre spiral staircase, so when I got to the bottom, I couldn't even see the door at the top. There were no windows down there, so besides my flashlight, it was pitch black. It was a completely unfinished basement, pieces of drywall everywhere, unfinished wood foundation where walls should be, but the basement was huge. Like there were multiple sections down there. It was big enough to fit a basketball court and more. Then I came across this back room with a few storage containers. I was here to explore after all, so I curiously started lifting the lids off the containers. The first two seemed to contain building tools and supplies like wood planks, but then I heard something from one of the other containers. It was like something caused the container to make a bump sound. Could it be an animal? Or was I just hearing things? I went to the container and noticed the lid was not sealed on this one, as it wasn't sitting perfectly snug on the top. As I bent over to try and lift the lid, it lifted without me touching it, and I heard a whispering noise. I fell backwards on my hands as this happened, and while I was on the ground, I saw a smiling woman looking at me. The only thing lifting the container up was her head. She looked at me, laughed, and said peekaboo, and she laughed some more. I ran to the top of the stairs, but the basement door was now locked. I banged on it for my friends to open it up, but they were apparently messing with me. I heard creaks on the spiral staircase below me. I couldn't see her yet, but I could hear her laughing getting closer, and she was mumbling incomprehensible things. I screamed at the top of my lungs to please help me, and Chad finally opened the door. I ran out and looked back for half a second, greeted by this ghostly, skinny figure of this pale woman looking up at me, almost at the top step. I slammed the door shut and locked it. Chad saw the woman too, and we bolted for the front door. We didn't care about leaving it open. The three of us got to the edge of the property to talk. After an hour of just sitting in my car thinking and talking, I agreed to go back inside and unlock the basement door. As scary as what I witnessed was, I didn't want to be responsible for someone dying down there. But when we got back inside, the basement door was wide open. I promise you we locked that door, so it made no sense. We once again bolted back outside towards the car and drove home, to never return to that mansion again. When I was a very young kid, we lived in an upper middle class neighborhood. Lots of space between each house. All the houses on our street were very nice, but there was one abnormally large house. It was closer to a mansion. It sat right across the street from us, and my bedroom window could look across to the windows of the mansion. Since our street was incredibly low traffic, our parents let us play soccer in the street. So my two friends Brian and Zeke were playing soccer one sunny day. It was usually just the three of us, so we had this kind of free-for-all version of soccer that we made up. Eventually the ball was kicked onto the property of the mansion, so I ran over to get it. When I picked up the ball, I looked at all the windows to see if the house owner was possibly witnessing me on his property. But at one of the top windows was a young boy who looked to be about our age. I hurried off the property and back to my friends. I asked them if they had ever seen the kid who lives in that mansion, and they hadn't. The second time I looked back at the window, the boy was no longer there. It wasn't for a while after that, probably a month, that I was in my room playing Nintendo, and for whatever reason I got up to get something, and I looked out my window across to the mansion, and I saw that boy at the window again. He was surely looking at me, all the way from across the street. It kind of creeped me out. I walked away from the window to ignore it. Why hadn't I ever seen that kid outside before? Come to think of it, why hadn't I ever really seen the owners of that house? I asked my parents about the boy across the street. They said they were pretty sure there was no boy in that house. So the next time Brian, Zeke, and I were playing in the street, we were thinking of potential fourth players to have a real game. I had an idea. I ran to the front door of that mansion and rang the bell. A 50-something-year-old woman answered. I asked if her son wanted to play soccer with us. She looked at me puzzled and said, "What son?" I replied, "The boy who was always at the upstairs window." I can't describe the look on her face besides shock and fear. She asked me what the boy looked like, and after my best description, a tear rolled down her cheek and she put her hands over her mouth. She brought me upstairs to the room where I kept seeing the boy. It was a boy's bedroom. She showed me a picture of a kid and asked me if this was the boy I was seeing, and I said yes. She told me that was her 8-year-old son Charlie, who died 10 years ago. That woman living there had been alone ever since she lost her son and husband. She believed what I said because I nor my parents would have ever had any way of knowing about her son. She didn't tell me or my parents what happened to her husband or son. As sad as this all was, it was still horrifying. There was one other time I saw the boy. I was in my room, months later, and I looked out my window to the woman's mansion across the street. There he was again, at the upstairs window. I could tell he was looking at me. I shut my blind with force and tried to forget about it. It still sends shivers up my spine when I think back on it. I was once hired to house sit for a friend of a family friend who was going away for a week. In this case, I should call it mansion sit, because the family was absolutely loaded, and the mansion sat on the rich side of town in front of a huge lake. I was 21, and it just seemed like a cool job to have for a week. The family's one rule was to throw no parties and no more than 2 guests at any time, which even that I thought was generous of them. The father's name was Benjamin, and that's the only name you'll need to know. Ben left me a list of things to keep track of every night, which included feeding the 2 cats and 2 parrots, watering the plants, among other things that really won't contribute to the story. The house was a half hour from home, so instead of just driving there and back every day, I opted to just sleep in one of the guest bedrooms, which they offered to me after all. The first day there, I got there very late, so it was a short one that got me kind of warmed up for what to expect the week ahead of me. After doing the insignificant amount of morning chores, I hopped in the pool they had in the backyard. The pool literally overlooked a gorgeous, tranquil lake, and even with the thought of getting to enjoy this unbelievable house for a week, I was still incredibly jealous. As I was in the pool, I noticed through the giant floor-to-ceiling windows to the living room somebody walking inside. I jumped out from the pool, freaking out. I ran to grab the towel and dry myself for a second before storming inside yelling, "Excuse me." I didn't see anyone in the living room, so I entered the kitchen, and there was a fairly large Hispanic woman who looked to be about 35 to 40. She was just standing there as if waiting for me. I asked her who she was and why she was here while trying to keep myself composed and confident. She said in a thick accent that she was the maid who came every day to clean the floors and stuff. She introduced herself as Eliza. I instantly felt a sense of relief and introduced myself as Mike, the guy who was house sitting for the week. She spoke in as little words as possible. I don't think her English was too good, but she basically said she was going to clean the floors in the kitchen and living room now. I said that was completely fine and let her do her thing. I asked her how she got in the house, and she said she had her own copy of the key. So that was that. I went back out to the pool for a little longer to let her do her thing. When I got out from the pool, I dried up and took a shower. After my shower, I fed the animals again. The parrots were easier than the cats, surprisingly. I didn't see the maid again, but I didn't really want to get in her way and have awkward small talk with someone who could barely speak English anyway. I had a couple friends over that night because everyone was eager to see the place, but I respected their rules of only 2 guests at a time. I gave them the best tour I could. Then we kinda just chilled in the game room they had, played some air hockey and pool table, and drank a little bit. When I told my friends about the cleaning lady scaring the hell out of me, they both found it insanely suspicious. Like, why wouldn't Ben have told me about the cleaning lady? They brought up a good point, so I shot Ben a text, asking about the cleaning lady. He didn't answer right away, and I didn't want to call. My friends wanted to sleep over, but I didn't want to push it. I had no idea if they had cameras in the house or not. So they left, and quickly after I started getting myself ready to lay down in bed. At some point I got a text back from Ben, apologizing for taking so long, and then asking what cleaning lady, with 2 question marks and an exclamation point. I typed back, Eliza, the Hispanic woman who came by and claimed she was the cleaning lady. That's when Ben called me with a concerned voice. He got more details from me after telling me there was no cleaning lady. That was the whole reason they hired me. I felt like I had been taken for a fool, but more importantly, I was terrified that I may not have been in that house alone at that very moment. Ben told me to just hide in a bedroom and that he'd call the police for me. So we hung up, and I waited in the room for the police to arrive. I had Ben on FaceTime when the police arrived, so he could also talk to them. We all looked through the house together, from top to bottom, and we didn't see anyone. I told Ben the lady said she had a spare key, but he said he was confident that that was a lie, because they never made any spare keys. He was confident she simply snuck in when I was in the pool or outside in general. After we were sure there was no one in the house, the police left, but they made sure I locked all the doors and windows before they did so. I spoke with Ben a little longer, who was very comforting, and asked I just hold down the fort and call the police if anything else should happen. We hung up, and I went to bed. I locked the door, of course. I left the air conditioner off so I could hear any potential noises from outside of the room. As I lay awake, subconsciously waiting for a noise, I heard one from under the bed. It sounded like a squeak on the wood floor. I hopped out of the bed and looked under it. There were two people hiding underneath. One was the lady from earlier, Eliza. The other was some man probably 10 years older than her, with his hand over her mouth. They both locked eyes with me. I screamed and I ran for the door. The moment that it took me to unlock the door and then open and shut it was more than I was comfortable with. As I did, I heard them crawling out from the bed. I ran outside to my car without my shoes and drove down the street, where I called the police, and then I called Ben again. I waited for police cars to pass, and then I followed them. We once again searched the whole house and found no one. This time I didn't stick around for the night. Ben told me to go home and stay safe. The family booked a flight back home the next day, cutting their vacation short. The intruders were never identified. All that can be speculated is they walked in through the front door while I was in the pool because I didn't lock the door, and that they somehow knew the family would be gone. No further info is known. I used to work at a Walmart. The Walmart I worked at was open 24 hours back then. Due to my kid's school schedule, I would work overnight shifts so that I would be available to drop him off and pick him up. I would do a 10 p.m. to 7 a.m. shift every night. During the day I'd sleep, take care of my son, and work my second job some days. I was exhausted a lot during this time in my life. It wasn't a great time. I had to do what I could to cover rent though. This Walmart was one of the bigger ones. It was a super center, not just a grocery store, so it had everything. It was one of the few open 24 hours around here. I think COVID changed that though. When I got there around 10 this one cold night, there was still a decent amount of shoppers in the store. A lot of people would come in for some late night shopping. As the hours would pass, it would of course quiet down tremendously. The late hours of the night would attract a lot of weirder characters, weirder than the usual ones during the day. Into the AM hours of the night, there was only one person working the front of the store, and he or she would be at the self-checkout registers. There were no regular registers open this late. There would also be a couple of stock workers on the floor, which was what I did. Then there would be a couple warehouse workers in the back, who I really didn't ever interact with. They did their own thing. And then there's just the night manager on duty. I was in the cereal aisle doing my usual stock work. I noticed a customer walk past the aisle, then seconds later he stepped back into view at the end of the aisle, stopped, and looked down at me. When I looked back at him, he started looking at the cereal. The guy had curly hair. I couldn't gauge his ethnicity honestly. He had a black backpack on that looked like it was stuffed to the brim with God knows what. He awkwardly lingers in the cereal aisle for a minute, apparently looking at the granola bars. Then he came a little closer to me and asked me where the bread is. I pointed him in the right direction. He said thanks and slowly walked away out of the aisle. I watched him walk away, and he had a very noticeable waddle in his walk. When he was out of sight, he was out of mind though. The problem was that he wasn't out of sight for long. I was in the cereal aisle for quite some time, and I started noticing that every few minutes that guy would slowly pass by the aisle looking down in this direction. He wasn't holding anything. He didn't get any bread. He just had on his big sketchy backpack. I started working faster just so I could finish this aisle and move away from him. When I was done, I brought the empty U-boat platform back to the warehouse, where I grabbed another U-boat full of boxes ready to stock. I purposely picked an aisle far away from the cereal aisle. I was now in the chips aisle. This is also about 45 minutes after initial contact with that guy, so there should have been no way he was still here. But I was wrong. He found me. I was rotating the newer bags of chips behind the older ones on the shelf, and then I looked to my right, and that guy was at the end of the aisle, creeping again. He still had nothing in his hands. This man had been creeping around the store for almost an hour. He then finally approached me as I was dreading he would. I tried to look away until he started to speak. I don't remember word for word what he said, but basically, he said that he's been checking me out, and and he couldn't resist coming up to me telling me how beautiful I am. I responded as politely as I could. I did a fake little laugh and said, "No, thank you, that's very sweet." He didn't stop there though. He asked a bunch of personal questions like where I'm from. I gave fake answers to everything. This guy absolutely reeked and his breath was awful. I was genuinely repulsed. He asked for my number and I said I'm seeing someone. He said there's nothing wrong with us just being friends. To get him to leave me alone, I gave him a fake number. I then told him I really can't be talking to anyone while I'm working. He made some creepy comment before walking away, thinking he was all suave that he got my number, when in reality he was genuinely creepy and I gave him a fake number. I thought that would be the end of it. Hours went by and time felt like it was going in reverse. I wanted to go home. Then the only other stock worker on the job at that hour suddenly walkie-talkied me, saying there's some creepy looking guy asking for me. I said oh no, and then told her to tell him I left. I then basically made a beeline for the employee lounge, where I planned on hiding for a while. I made it to the lounge and then sat in one of the seats. Then the double doors opened, and in came that guy. He looked at me, and he looked angry. He yelled, "You gave me a fake number, you bitch." I think I swallowed my gum out of fear. I said, "You can't be back here, sir." He then took off his backpack and plopped it on the table next to mine. He started unzipping it as he looked at me. That's when it was time for me to go. I got up and ran past him without thinking. He tried to grab my arm, but he failed. As I ran through the store, I looked back and saw he was running after me. I ran to the front of the store and outside to my car. It was the only thing I could think to do in the moment. Alternatively, I could have tried finding the male warehouse workers in the back or even the manager, but that was no guarantee. I got to my car and saw the man leave the Walmart looking for me. He was slow, he must have been on something. He saw my car, but it was too late. I was already driving away. I called the night manager and let him know what just went down, and that I'm not comfortable staying there tonight. I also warned him of the man with the backpack full of unknown contents. My manager told me I can't leave the place short-staffed. He said he'd call the police to make sure the man doesn't come back, and he told me to come back. I was adamant about not returning that night, though. He eventually got the message and said he'd review the camera footage, but that I need to come back tomorrow night. And I did. He allegedly notified the police the next day of the man and gave the police department the surveillance footage. I met a lot of characters working that job, but this guy was by far the scariest. I don't know what he was reaching for in his backpack. I don't want to either. I was 14 when this happened. There's a Walmart that's walking distance to my house. I used to sometimes go there to buy clothing and such before I was of driving age, since it was so close. Sometimes I'd go with my friend Emily, sometimes I'd just go alone. The Walmart is part of the nearby mall, but the mall kind of stinks now. Most of the good stores have closed over the years. Plus, I wasn't made of money when I was 14, and Walmart is cheap. One night I walked to Walmart with my AirPods in. It's a 15-minute walk. When I put my AirPods in, I shut out everything else around me. I feel like most people with basic social awareness know that if someone's wearing headphones, it means they don't want to have to take them out to talk to you. I was minding my business in Walmart in the girls' clothing department when I noticed a guy next to me saying something. I couldn't hear what he was saying, but it looked like he was talking to me. I took out my AirPods, and I said, "Are you talking to me?" He said yes. He was this shorter man with gray hair who looked like 50. He had glasses and a clean-shaven face. He smiled and said, "Sorry, I didn't see your headphones." Sure he didn't. He said he was just telling me how his daughter buys the same exact kind of jeans I was wearing. I had no idea why he was telling me this, but I'm a very polite person to everybody. I always have been. So I chose to be kind to him by laughing and saying, "Oh, that's funny." That should have been the end of an interaction that didn't need to happen, but of course this wouldn't be a story if it was. I was still looking through this rack of tops as the man kept trying to talk to me. He mistook my kindness for actual interest in talking to him clearly. He asked my age and I said 14, and his response was unsettling. He basically said, "Oh, what a great age. So mature, but still so young." He asked my name, and for some reason I actually gave him my real name. And his response to my name was, "Wow, that's my favorite name for a girl." Next up, he asked what school I went to, And around now was when I decided to start making things up. I said I'm actually not from around here, I'm just visiting my cousin. He couldn't let it go though, and he persisted, asking where I'm from. I said I'm from out of state, keeping it vague. But then he said, I've seen you around here before. Are you sure you're not from around here? I looked at him and tried to think of a response, but instead, I ended up turning around and walking away from him. I was for the first time ever actually made very uncomfortable by a stranger. The way he said he's seen me before made me feel as though he'd been watching me or paid attention to me in this Walmart before. I went to buy the jeans I was holding at the front of the Walmart. Then I walked through the store to enter the mall. It was November or December, and they had just put up the Christmas decorations, so I wanted to walk through. And I also wanted to see if any new stores opened, since my shopping in Walmart was cut short. I walked through the mall with really nothing catching my eye. I went into a Victoria's Secret, and while inside of there, I saw through the glass that guy from Walmart sitting on a bench in the mall outside of the Victoria's Secret. I left the store and started walking very quickly through the mall. When I turned around and saw he was now walking behind me, I started to panic and called my mom, asking her for a ride because I was being followed by a man. I took her advice and waited in a store with multiple people inside. He came to the entrance of the store, and he creepily said my name in this way that he clearly didn't want a lot of people to hear him. I started to feel sick. I went to the cashier and said this man is following me. I don't know him. Some customers overheard and looked over, and the man clearly noticed and started walking away into the mall. The cashier, who was probably only 20 years old herself, sympathized with me. A couple even came over and said they'd wait with me until my mom got here. My mom came into the mall eventually, and I left with her, thanking the couple who waited with me. I didn't go to the mall or that Walmart alone anymore. I didn't even go back with friends for a long time either. I hope that guy got caught being a creep and has been taken off the streets. My worst job ever was working at Walmart. I worked there only for a few months. I hated every minute of it, honestly. I didn't get along with a lot of my coworkers. The customers were crazy and weird, and I felt like a lot of people just generally were unfriendly. I was 24, and Walmart was my second job to make ends meet with my new apartment. Sometimes I'd work register, sometimes I'd work the desk outside the fitting room, and sometimes I'd work general sales associate. On this day, I was a general associate, walking around the place assisting customers and straightening things on the shelves. I interacted with a bunch of people that day. I still remember dealing with some of the dumbest customers I'd ever had the displeasure of interacting with, but nothing could have prepared me for who I was going to run into that day. I got a random pat on the back, and I turned around to see my ex-girlfriend Casey. She looked super happy to see me and went in for a hug. I was surprised because she didn't live anywhere near here. I asked what brought her here, and she said she heard through a mutual friend that I started working here recently. Casey and I did not leave off on good terms at all. She had been harassing me for a while since I had broken up with her, and I had to end up blocking her on everything to get her to stop. She was insanely controlling throughout our relationship, and downright obsessive, bipolar, and paranoid. And after I ended things with her, she wouldn't stop trying to contact me and meet up with me to talk things out, even though we had talked things out multiple times. She even left multiple voicemails crying. I take no joy in any of that. I don't say any of this to belittle her or make a joke of mental illness, but she has issues, and I came to learn that, and I had to tell her multiple times her behavior is not normal. Her finding out I got this job and coming to my place of work I was not okay with. Even though I hugged her back and was cordial at first in this interaction, I eventually cut the crap and said, "Why are you here?" The fake friendliness stopped here on both sides. Her face got more serious, and she started telling me that it's really messed up that I block her out of my life like this. I told her this is the exact kind of behavior that made me block her. Showing up to my job is not normal. Then I started asking her which mutual friend told her that I worked here. She claimed that's irrelevant, and I assured her it most certainly is not irrelevant, because I didn't believe that anyone told her where I work. I had broken up with Casey many months ago. She should have had no way of knowing about my new job or apartment, and I was confident none of my friends were even in contact with her anymore. I told her I'm seeing someone else now. I have to get back to work. Please leave and don't contact me again. She refused to leave, so I simply just started walking away to an employees only area. She didn't follow me back there. It was at this moment I actually started considering trying to get a restraining order. After my shift was over, it had to be like 11 p.m., closing time. I left the store and went straight home. My roommate was home, his car was in the driveway. I parked next to him and went inside. I went straight to the kitchen to make myself a late dinner, as I always would after closing shifts. I microwaved some frozen meal and went to the living room to play video games. For a while, this was my only time to unwind and do what I wanted. I played for maybe an hour, then went to bed. I woke up not long after falling asleep. I thought I heard something. I looked up and realized my bedroom door was open. I definitely did not do that. My roommate Paul goes to bed really early because he works early, and there's no chance he'd just get up and randomly open my door. I got up and walked out into the living room. I turned on a lamp and looked around the place. I went over to the front door, and it was unlocked. What the hell was going on? I was thinking, did Paul leave? I looked out the window and saw that his car was still there. I locked the front door. Then I went to his bedroom door and tried opening it. It was locked. I knocked on the door lightly once, and he didn't respond, so he was asleep. I was genuinely confused. I went out front and looked under the pot where we kept a hidden spare key. It wasn't there. My heart was in my throat at this point. The only person in this world besides Paul and my family who knows that I like to hide a spare key outside is Casey. I checked at least 5 times under the pot, even checking the surrounding area on the chance that maybe it was kicked out of place or something. I went back inside the house and shut the front door. I went to the knife holder in the kitchen, and the biggest knife was missing. My phone was still in my bedroom. I had to be smart about this. I tiptoed to my bedroom door until I was close enough to grab the doorknob as fast as I could and slam it shut from the outside. I screamed as loud as I could for Paul. He erupted from his room, obviously confused, and there were suddenly bangs on the bedroom door from the other side, along with Casey's voice saying, "I'm sorry, let's talk." I held the door closed with all my might as she kept trying to pull it open. Paul called the police as I held the door. After a few minutes of this, Casey stopped trying to pull the door open, and she was hysterically crying on the other side of the door. Finally, the police arrived and came inside. I moved away from the door, and the officers made sure Casey dropped the knife before she came out. She was of course arrested, and I didn't even have to press charges. She was charged by the state for, I believe, burglary in the 2nd degree, and she's currently serving a pretty lengthy prison term for this. I'm honestly shocked she didn't get charged for attempted murder. It's a sick situation all around. I don't know when she'll be out. I'll have been long moved out of this place by then. My biggest regret is not catching the red flags with her early on. My girlfriend and I love skiing. It's how we met. So last year, during both of our vacation times, we Airbnb'd a 1-bedroom cabin in Colorado by Vail Mountain. One of my friends told us getting a private cabin was a lot more cozy, peaceful, and romantic. After landing at the airport, we taxied to a rental car place and rented a Honda Civic, probably the cheapest car we could get. We drove a constant uphill through the sludge on the roads until we pulled off the main road onto a more foresty side road. Eventually, we made it to the cabin. Far and isolated from anyone else, but not too far where getting to the mountain would be a pain in the ass. The owner left the key hidden in the mailbox. As soon as I unlocked the door and we stepped inside, we got a huge whiff of, I guess, wood. It literally smelled exactly how you'd expect a log cabin to smell. It wasn't huge, but it was spacious enough. 1 bedroom, 1 bathroom, decent living room with a TV, and a kitchen. I was paying chump change for it, so I was more than happy with it. Plus, we were there to ski, not sit around the cabin. We got there towards the end of the day, so we didn't hit the slopes that night. We actually just unloaded and got right back on the road to pick up a pizza for dinner. We got back and ate on the couch in the living room while watching a movie. With the dark, moody lighting and the whole log cabin atmosphere, it actually was quite romantic, until my girlfriend started freaking out about her bag. Apparently it wasn't where she left it, which was on the coffee table in the living room. I helped her look around, though there wasn't much space to search. She was absolutely positive she left it on the coffee table. It wasn't in the bathroom, kitchen, or living room, so I checked the bedroom, and sure enough, it was sitting right next to the bed. I picked it up and brought it to the doorway of the bedroom with a smirk on my face. My girlfriend didn't seem as relieved as I thought she would be, though. She accused me of moving it and going through her bag, which I found downright insane. We had a bit of an argument until I convinced her that she in fact put her bag in there and that she had just forgotten. We went back to eating and watching the movie, and we got over the argument quickly. The next day, we hit the slopes from early morning till dusk. We stopped on the way back to the cabin to get dinner again. When we returned back to the cabin, we both immediately noticed the living room light was on. My girlfriend was slightly freaking out. I told her to chill. The front door was still locked, so that confirmed nobody had broken in. I thought obviously one of us left the light on by mistake and didn't notice earlier because it was bright out. So once again, we ate our food and watched a movie, when suddenly, out of nowhere, my girlfriend shrieked. I jumped up and looked at her. She had one hand covering her mouth, the other pointing at something on the ground. At first I didn't see it, but when I got up confused and moved closer, I saw it. It was a pair of somewhat fresh boot marks in the rug in the corner of the living room. The snow from the boots had melted into wet stains in the area rug. Obviously both of us wore boots, but I just didn't remember stepping over there. My girlfriend asked me to check around the cabin to make her feel safe, so I did. I peeped under the kitchen table, behind the living room couch, in the bathroom, and I took a peep in the bedroom. There didn't appear to be anyone in the cabin. There weren't really many places to hide anyway. Still, she was scared and seemed to lose all interest in the movie. She went to the bathroom and brushed her teeth, then went to the bedroom to change, and I heard her jump into bed. So I did all the same. I climbed into bed and shut the light, and we sat there for a while just talking. It was actually only like 9 or 10 p.m. My girlfriend kept letting me know how uncomfortable she was, thinking someone was in the cabin. So I told her, okay, just wait 1 second. I took out my phone and dialed the Airbnb host. I put the phone up to my ear and heard it ring. I don't mean the ring coming from the phone speaker. I meant I heard a loud, muffled ringing coming from behind the wall next to the bed. The ringing stopped as soon as I saw my call was rejected. My girlfriend started screaming, "Oh my God." I told her to calm down as I got up and approached the wall to the left. I noticed an ever so slight crack in the wall that looked like it could be a door. My girlfriend screamed at me not to open it, but I got myself angry, yelled, and pulled open the door. There I was, faced with a small hidden closet, and inside, a man hiding behind a cardboard box in the corner. It was the host, the owner of the cabin. I'd seen his picture on the listing. I'll admit, I jumped and screamed in fear and shock when I saw him, but anger overcame me and I grabbed him by his shirt and pulled him out. I knew he looked creepy based on his picture. He had his hands up, apologizing. I told him to shut up. I looked deeper in the closet, and to my disgust, found some of my girlfriend's underwear. It took way too long for the police to arrive, but he was arrested. We had to spend the rest of that night at a hotel, and the next day we went home. I requested compensation from Airbnb, and it took months for them to refund me, but they eventually did. This story was so bizarre and disturbing, I don't even expect everyone to believe it when I tell it, but it was oh too real. When my best friend Lizzie and I were 18, we went on our first vacation alone together to London. We were staying at the London Marriott Hotel. The first thing we did upon arrival was of course to get there and drop off all our luggage. We'd be there for a whole week, so we had to set our itinerary. It was late in the day already, so we didn't have much time that day, but we did want to see something at least, so we went to see Big Ben, which is that iconic big clock tower that everyone knows in pictures when you think of London. After that, we went to a nearby tavern for dinner called St. Stephen's Tavern. It was money, but good thing our dads were paying for this trip. After leaving the tavern, it was like 9 o'clock, and we were wanting to go out and experience the nightlife. We agreed we'd first have to go back to the hotel and shower and change first. As we were walking, a young, attractive man overheard us talking about the nearby bars we were looking at on our phones, and he stopped us. Something about him immediately was just charming that grabs both my and Lizzie's attention, and if it weren't for that, maybe we wouldn't have been so receptive to him telling us about a big apartment party that one of his rich friends was throwing that night, and that two attractive ladies like ourselves would fit right in. Lizzie and I looked at each other and laughed. We said we'd be down, and he said great, the party doesn't start till 11. He asked for my number, so I gave it to him. Then he said he'd text me the details and see us later, and down the street he walked. Lizzie and I were super excited. It was only the first night and we were already invited to a crazy London party. We figured if we played our cards right with the wealthy people at this apartment party, we would have people to hang out with the rest of the trip. We got back to the hotel, showered and changed, and we pre-gamed with a little vodka first to loosen ourselves up. I think we drank more than we should have though. I texted the guy we met, realizing we didn't even get his name. He texted back quickly with the address to the apartment, so we loudly marched into the street to wait for our Uber. It was a 15-minute Uber drive to get to the apartment, and when we got there, we couldn't believe how different the architecture of this apartment building was compared to something back home in America. I pressed the code for the apartment, and we were quickly buzzed in. We took the elevator to the 5th floor. We were excited, but nervous, not knowing what to expect. The alcohol was definitely helping, though. I knocked on the door to the apartment, but we didn't hear music inside, which was odd. We were nervous we had the wrong apartment, until the young man from earlier opened the door. He hugged us hello, and welcomed us into this dead, quiet apartment. He shut the door, and we asked, "Where is everyone?" He said, "Oh, it's still early, don't worry." We looked around the apartment, and it was not at all as big as we were expecting for an apparent rich guy. We asked where his friend who owned the apartment was. The man said he was getting things ready in his room. He told us to sit and make ourselves comfortable. I remember looking at my phone and seeing it was like 11:30. Lizzie and I sat down, and I could tell by her face she was as put off by this as I was. The man sat down on the same couch as us, next to me. He was uncomfortably close. Suddenly, another man came out from another room. He didn't say anything. He didn't smile. He just looked at us as he walked towards the door to the apartment. Then he just stood there. The man on the couch with us started asking us questions like where we were from and if it was just us two visiting here. I started feeling sick to my stomach. The man next to us got up and went to the kitchen to get us some drinks. The man by the door stood there. Lizzie was to the left of me, so she was more hidden from view. I whispered in her ear to dial 911. She did so, and I noticed her tapping on the phone multiple times, indicating to the call taker that we needed help. Lizzie then suddenly called out loudly to the man in the kitchen, "This is apartment 5C, right?" The man at the door said yes in a deep, unfriendly voice. I whispered to Lizzie again that we needed to stall, and not to drink any drinks the man gave us. As I was whispering to Lizzie, the man standing at the door called to the man in the kitchen to hurry up with the drinks, and then he came back from the kitchen with the drinks. I had to think on my feet, to stall as long as possible before drinking whatever he just set in front of us. I put on a fake and bubbly persona and said we should play Would You Rather. I know it sounds juvenile, but I had to think of a game that didn't involve drinking. The man seemed to play along with it, so me and Lizzie started coming up with Would You Rather questions. And he started coming up with some of his own, but he would often suggest we take a sip of our drinks, saying the guests would be there soon and that we needed to loosen up some more. I stalled for as long as I could, saying we already drank a lot, but we'd be down to drink more in a little bit. I remember when things were about to turn really south. The two men looked at each other. Then the bigger, scarier man at the door came over and said, "All right, drink your drinks." He was about to reach for one of the glasses to probably force in my face, when there was an aggressive banging at the door, followed by a man shouting police. The younger man looked at us and asked, "Did you call the police?" I said, "No, why and when would we?" But my voice cracked as I said this, indicating I was nervous. Lizzie apparently just decided the hell with my story and screamed help. The police started to attempt to kick the door down, But the bigger man screamed, all right, and opened the door with his hands up. The two men tried playing innocent. Lizzie and I had to fabricate the story a little bit, saying the two men basically forced us into the apartment and wouldn't let us leave, and that we were pretty sure they drugged our drinks. That was enough to get the men arrested. A second police car arrived to escort us to the station for further questioning. The drinks were tested, and it turned out to no surprise they were roofied. This was definitely a scarring experience, but we didn't let it ruin our trip to London. In fact, we never told our parents until years later, just because it would probably make them less likely to let us travel anymore. The alcohol definitely didn't help our initial decision making in the night. But our advice would probably be don't ever trust strangers, no matter what they look like. When I was 14, my parents took us on a trip to a family resort. It was in the middle of nowhere, and it was the most countryish, old-style resort you could ever imagine. Every building was made of wood, there were big creepy bugs crawling around, the inside of the resort halls all smelled like cigarettes. I felt too old to be in there with my family, especially since I'm the only boy out of my siblings, and my sisters were 9 and 5 at the time. I tried looking for teens my age to make friends with, but it really seemed like it was just families with younger kids. However, I met this girl who was 15. We met in the little arcade hall when I was with my 2 sisters. She came up to me and said, "Hey." As it turned out, she was staying here with her family too, and she wasn't having a good time either. So we started to hang out. She seemed kind of cool, a little strange, had somewhat gothy vibes to her. Her name was Alyssa. The next day, I ran into her again as I was passing by the pool. She waved me over, and she said let's go for a walk in the woods by the river. As we did, I tried to get to know her more. I asked her what building her room was in. She hesitated before her answer and then said, "The one next to the main hall." It was a vague answer. We sat by the river for a while, and I gotta admit, she started talking about some weird, dark stuff. I won't get into it, but I started to think she had some issues. Then she looked up at me and said, "Can we go to your room?" I lit up with excitement inside. I was a 14-year-old boy, hormones raging, so obviously I said yes with a little too much excitement in me, imagining the best case scenario. We got close to my room and she asked for the card to open the door, and she ran ahead to open it. We sat on my bed for a few minutes. I was a bit awkward, so I didn't know how to make a move or if to make a move. She started talking about deep, dark stuff again though. How she hated her family, how she had no more friends, how she likes the feel of blood, whatever that meant. Then out of nowhere, she flicked open a huge switchblade and looked at me. She told me sometimes she thinks about using this on herself or someone else. That was the moment this went from weird to disturbing. This wasn't going where I thought it was. It was actually going in a much darker, scarier direction. The way she looked at me with the knife flicked open was scaring me. She looked at me and said, "Do you want to use this knife on someone here?" I thought over my answer and said, "I don't know, I have to think about it." Obviously I would never, but this girl's true psychotic nature had just come out, and I had to play it safe. I said we should go back outside and walk around. She said okay. So we went back outside and walked around the resort grounds. I watched the way she looked at people passing by, staring them down, not caring when they would notice. Luckily, I saw my parents straight ahead, and I said, "Oh shoot, there's my parents. I should probably go hang out with them." Alyssa looked a little bit annoyed. All she said was, "Okay." I said, "See ya," and she just looked at me. I went to my family, and for the rest of the day and night, I stayed with them, hoping to not run into that freaky girl again. That night, we got back to the room around 9. This resort had huge rooms, so basically I had my own room that was attached to my parents' and sister's room, but it also had its own door into the hall. Anyway, I went to sleep, or at least tried to. Half an hour into laying in bed, I heard the beep from the door unlocking, and then the door to my room opening and closing. By the time I fully looked up, the door was shut and the light from the hall was gone. I saw someone standing in front of the door though. "Who is it?" I said. I heard a familiar girl's voice. "I want blood." I sat up and remembered I never got my key card back from Melissa. She planned this. She approached my bed in the dark with something in her left hand because she had it lifted. She said it again. "I want blood. Will you help me, or will I get it from you?" I'm not ashamed to admit it. I screamed like a goddamn girl. She still stood there. She didn't charge at me. She didn't run at first. When my dad burst into the room, though, that's when she took off. My dad saw her, and I yelled she was about to kill me. He was about to go after her, but I screamed, "Don't, she has a knife." Everyone in the hall came out of their rooms to see what was going on. We went down to the main office to get some info on this Alyssa girl, and out of all the guests, there was no one named Alyssa. Hell, there were no girls even close to her age staying at the resort at that current time. Police were called, and like 4 cop cars showed up and searched the whole perimeter. I think like 2 or 3 cop cars stayed overnight since there were so many kids at the place. The key card lock was changed on our door for the night. A lot of families, including mine, left the next day, and we got a refund for the 2 days we cut short. This whole thing was actually insane. That girl was fucked up in the head, and it's scary knowing she was probably in the early stages of being a completely different monster. My aunt and uncle live in Fort Myers, Florida. Every winter we visit them for a weekend just to see them and escape the cold. This has been a long-time tradition, dating back to when they first moved there, about 15 years ago, so we'd been doing this almost as long as I could remember. This happened back when I was 12. My cousin Ashley, who was a year older than me, would always be there, of course, so the two of us would hang out a lot during these visits. She was cool to hang out with, and I related to her a lot, even though I was a young boy and she's a girl. She'd always be down to do the cool stuff that I'd normally do with my friends at that age. After the family dinner on the first night there, we all watched a movie together. After the movie, our parents hung out with each other in the kitchen drinking wine. They wouldn't let Ashley and I go out that late, as we were only 12 and 13, but Ashley wanted to go to a nearby canal where locals were apparently reporting having seen a 10-foot-long alligator. Basically, we both wanted to go see if we could find the gator after she convinced me. We snuck out through the back door while our parents were still in the kitchen. On our way to the canal, we stopped at the 7-Eleven on the street so we could get some snacks on the way. The cashier already told us to be careful out there, implying it was late for us to be out. The streets were deserted at this hour. The area of Fort Myers in which they live is on the significantly quieter side. We walked for like 10 minutes, and the closer we got to this canal she kept talking about, the swampier the sides of the road started to get. Ashley froze in front of me and looked straight ahead. She pointed ahead and said, "What's that guy doing?" I saw right away what she meant. At the far end of the street, there was the silhouette of this man, just standing completely still on the sidewalk. If he was walking or perhaps looking down at something in his hands, it would have been different. But him just standing still doing nothing, apparently looking off straight ahead, it just sent shivers down both our spines. Ashley said this was the only way to get to the canal, unless we cut through people's yards or gross sewage-type water. So we continued walking, but slower, more cautious now. We were half the distance from the man now, when he suddenly turned around. I don't mean he turned his head. No, he literally turned his whole body around at once without even taking a peek to see if we were coming first or anything. We stopped. He was facing us, no doubt. There was a bit of a standoff for a few seconds before he lifted his arm and started waving at us. It wasn't a normal, gentle wave of a hand. No, he was waving his whole arm. It soon transitioned into him making a come here motion with his arm. Ashley and I looked at each other, then started running away down the street, back the way we came. We got winded pretty quickly and stopped to catch our breath in front of some small yellow house. We sat on the grass of the property for a second, just gathering our thoughts. Ashley told me there are a lot of weird people that live down there, especially in the area we were just walking. Now I understood why her parents didn't want her out this late alone. We got up after a couple minutes and started walking back to her house when we saw him again. That guy was at the end of the street, not moving once again. He was as still as he was before, his same exaggeratedly stiff, arms flatted side posture. He was directly under a streetlight this time, so we could see his features. He was like 40. His hair seemed to be slightly slicked back. His nose seemed to be fucked up, like it was bent to the side. He was smiling too. He wasn't showing teeth though, it was a closed-mouthed smile. He once again started waving at us. Then, I still don't know why, Ashley got up and waved back at him. As she did this, he stopped waving and his smile disappeared. It was only a few seconds later that he erupted into a full-on sprint towards us. Ashley started screaming and running. I got up off the ground and ran as fast as I could after her. I was in pure shock. I think that's why I couldn't get a scream out. That and it would take extra breath that I didn't have. We ran through people's yards, hopped over fences, and ran down different streets until we finally made it back to her house. The back door was locked now, so unfortunately we had to knock on the door, exposing us. Trying to avoid getting in trouble, we simply said we ran to 7-Eleven to get snacks. While Ashley's parents were more upset than mine, they let us off with just a slap on the wrist, telling us not to go out again at that hour. That man's face lit up under that streetlight still terrifies me to this day, 10 years later. My two friends and I were having a sleepover on one of the last summer nights before the new school year started. We didn't want to end it on a dull note, so we decided later that night that we would sneak out and walk about a mile to our local high school. We live in a small town in the middle of bumfuck Massachusetts, so everything is close. Around 12 a.m., both my friends and I left the house and started making our way to the high school. The way there was uneventful, just us walking down the road laughing, sometimes yelling, just being typical dumb teenagers like always. We walked in the middle of the road because it was late and there was hardly any traffic in general. It took about 20 minutes to make it to the high school, where all we did was lay on the turf field, look up at the stars, and talk about the summer, as well as other stupid shit that made us laugh. We actually had such a good time that we laid there for almost an hour, so when we decided to walk back, it was close to 1 o'clock. As we made our way down the road back home, we approached a T intersection. That's where we saw a car. We noticed the car was just sitting there at the stop sign, which was on our side of the road. We could only see the headlights because the rest of the car was blocked by a row of trees. No cars were coming either. Of course, it was 1 o'clock in the morning, but the car didn't move. It just sat there. My friends and I continued to approach the intersection. Suddenly, the car slowly moved further out of the intersection, turned in our direction, and began driving past us. We made out the car to be an old white Mustang. As it passed, my friend yelled something stupid about the car being a V6, making fun of it. It was funny for about 0.8 seconds until the vehicle slammed on the brakes. I felt my heart go into my throat as the car peeled into a fast U-turn. I yelled to my friends, "Run," and we all ran down the street. We ran onto the joining road where we first saw the car coming out of. As soon as I made it near the row of trees, I jumped into the woods. So did my friends a few yards down the road. We had about 3 seconds to spare before the car turned down the road. He started slow rolling down the street like he was looking for us, and when he didn't see us, he stopped. Out stepped 2 large men, one holding a massive rod. I muttered "fuck" under my breath as I hid in the leaves. They began walking towards the tree line. I quietly covered my mouth to conceal my breathing. My heart was beating so fast and hard I felt like they would hear it too. The driver, who had a big metal rod in his hand, yelled threats at us into the woods. He continued looking into the woods, along with his buddy. I could feel their eyes pass me over and over again. They just stood there, watching, listening for one of us to make a sound. If he walked only a few more yards from the tree line into the woods, he would find me. His buddy said, "Fuck it, let's go," as he started walking back to the passenger side of the car. "There'll be others out," he said. The driver took one last look into the woods and hopped into his car. The car turned around and took off back down the road past the high school leading out of town. I stayed in the woods for another couple of minutes, waiting to see if the car would come back, which it didn't. I stepped out along with my friends further down the road, and we all ran all the way home. We made it back and tried to enjoy the rest of our night. We tried to laugh about it later, but deep down, we knew how scary that was. We thought it was just another crazy experience until 2 days later, when we found out through some local friends of ours that a white Mustang was stolen and involved in a robbery from the next town over. the same night we were chased. I could only imagine what would have happened if those two men decided to walk further into the woods. When I was 16, I had a curfew. I wasn't allowed out past 12 on the weekends. My friend Jose was lucky enough to not have a curfew. It was a Saturday in 2013. My parents were asleep. Jose wanted to go explore some abandoned hospital across town, so I snuck out of my room very quietly and tiptoed down the stairs. I exited through the back door and grabbed my bike from the shed, then I left on my way to Jose's house. From there, I met him and we rode across town. It took about 10 minutes. I followed him the whole way, until we ended up at this fenced-off property. Inside of the perimeter was this tall brick building. It didn't look that old. It was once an active hospital many years ago. The town just never bothered to tear it down. We parked our bikes in a big bush out of sight. Next step was hopping the fence, which was easy. The third step was finding a way into the building. We scanned the perimeter by walking around the building, until we found a basement-level window that was already broken open. Jose went in first. I shined my flashlight into the window for him so he could see. It looked a little scary down there, considering how dark it was. Nevertheless, I wasn't going to bitch out now. It was my turn to enter while he held the light. Once we were in and both had our flashlights on though, it was pretty well lit. There wasn't much in this basement level we entered into. It seemed to be mostly for storage and boiler type rooms. We found a stairway upstairs, and once we went through this rusty door, we were on the main floor, in this hallway that still had some of the lights on. It sounds weird, but having some of the hospital lights still on just made this more eerie. Like we were a little more worried about running into someone. It's not like the whole place was lit up. There would be like one light on here and one light on down the hall, with lots of pitch black corners and dark gaps in between. There was also this loud buzzing, whistling sound that we couldn't pinpoint. It was kind of creepy. We started exploring by taking a look into each little room. Most of the expensive stuff seemed to be cleared out, like the beds and equipment. The place was kind of clean for an abandoned building, though. It seemed not many people explored it. That or just previous people didn't trash it. Though there were some holes in the walls, and some things thrown on the floors, as expected. There was one room with the door closed. We tried opening it, but it was locked. Extremely weird, considering every other door was opened. Jose had a good point, though. Patients' sleeping room doors aren't permitted to have locks on them, so that meant something was blocking the door. We also heard noises on the other side of the door, like very, very light thump sounds. We went into the adjacent room, and there were a bunch of tiny holes in the walls. There was one hole in the wall adjacent to the next room over with the blocked door, a hole big enough to look through. I quietly got on my knees to look through it. My eyes had to adjust to the darkness, but after a second, I could see a woman in a long white dress, leaning on the far wall, seemingly looking at the door to the room. I was truly about to piss myself after seeing her. I whispered to Jose to look. He didn't believe me, but when he looked through the door, he gasped. We whispered to each other, wondering if we should get out. Jose said yes. He stood up and went to the door to the room. I got on my knees one more time to look through the hole again. As I put my eye up to the hole, the entire room was now blocked, because the woman had gotten on her knees and was looking through the hole back at me with this huge smile on her face. I screamed so loud it definitely echoed throughout the whole building. Jose didn't even ask why, he just ran for it with me back to the way we came in the basement. He crawled up through the window first, then me. The whole time I was trying to squeeze through the window, I was scared she was going to come up behind me and pull my legs back in. When we were both outside, we ran for our bikes and pedaled all the way back to Jose's. We didn't laugh about it at all. It genuinely was nightmare fuel. I went straight home after saying bye to him. I didn't feel safe being anywhere but inside my house, in my bed. I don't believe in ghosts, so I don't believe that was a ghost. I believe there was actually some psychotic woman in there. But all I'm saying is if I did believe in ghosts, I would 100% believe that's what I saw in that room. What I'm about to tell you is one of the last memories I can still remember from middle school. and not for a good reason. I'd argue that it was the most traumatic thing that has ever happened to me. When I was in middle school, I didn't have a lot of friends. The friends I did have were all a little odd, but then again, so was I. We spent a lot of time together and enjoyed a lot of the same things. There was Greg, Jay, Mark, and myself. We were inseparable. Back then, it seemed like the four of us would last forever. Looking back though, it was pretty clear that Jay and I were beginning to distance ourselves from Mark and Greg, but that's neither here nor there. One summer, Greg invited the three of us on a week-long trip to Maine. Greg's family had a summer home up in Maine on one of the little islands in Casco Bay. To be completely honest, his family was really secretive about the place, and none of us even knew it existed until he invited us there. His family was strange in general, but that's a story for another time. The drive was long and uncomfortable. I had a runny nose and was sneezing the entire time, which I could tell was really pissing off Greg's dad. He was one of those over-the-top germaphobes, and I got really uncomfortable anytime he'd look at me. Mark and I were also bickering about something stupid, but the two of us tended to get into that a lot. We had to drive the car onto a ferry in order to make it to the island. That part was actually really fun. The house was small but pretty. I remember feeling detached from reality in that house. I can't really explain it. It was like a whole other world on that island. I still feel like it would be easy for a person to get lost in that house, if that makes any sense. The island had a really dreamy feel. Everyone knew each other, and random people on the street would recognize and say hello to Greg when they saw him. We spent most of our time biking around, an activity that never got boring at our age. I'll skip the boring stuff. I don't remember all of it anyway. The second day of the trip, I couldn't find my Barcelona snapback cap anywhere. I was really upset since I was a huge soccer fan, and it was one of the only pieces of merch I had. Greg said he thought I left it on the beach, but I was almost certain I had brought it back. I remember crying to Greg's dad, who basically told me to get over it and not let something small ruin the trip, so that's what I did. The next day, after a long day of biking around, I realized one of my pens was missing. I had a pen collection at that time, which I brought everywhere. Like I said, weird kid. I couldn't remember whether or not I had taken that specific pen out of my case, but Jay said he remembered seeing me holding it on my bike. I was devastated. To me, losing a pen was the equivalent of losing a limb. That's how serious I was about them. I refused to cry again in front of Greg's dad, so I claimed I wasn't feeling well and opted to spend the rest of the evening in bed. I ended up falling asleep really early because of that, so I guess I shouldn't have been surprised when I woke up at 3 a.m. and couldn't fall back asleep. I was rolling around trying to fall back asleep when I picked up on something. I froze for a few seconds to confirm what I was hearing. Someone was whispering, almost inaudibly. I had to focus really hard to even hear it. Was I dreaming? There was no shot. I tried as best as possible to make out what they were saying, but couldn't understand a single word. It sounded like it was coming from Mark's bed, the top bunk across the room from me, but I couldn't be certain. I waited a few minutes, but the whispering continued. For some reason, I was scared to say anything or reveal that I was awake. Eventually, I blocked the whispering out of my mind and fell asleep. The next morning, I tried to forget about what had happened the night before. I debated asking my friends which of them had been doing it, but decided against it. We were playing some dumb game in the yard when Mark said he had to use the bathroom. He was gone a while, but that was typical for Mark. He took a lot of time to do everything. Eventually, I shot a glance back at the house and had to do a double take. In one of the second-floor windows was Mark, staring blankly out at us. I figured he was in the bathroom, but that's when it hit me. Greg's house didn't have a second-floor bathroom. I turned to see if either Greg or Jay noticed, but neither of them were looking. When I turned to look back at the house, Mark was gone. Greg's dad was planning on taking us to dinner that night, but I didn't want to go. I pretended to be sick again and told him I wanted to nap instead. He said that was fine and told me he'd bring me back something. As I was lying in bed, I realized there was no way I was going to fall asleep. I started thinking things over in my head. I just couldn't get over how weird it was that Mark was watching all of us from the house, and the whispering was even creepier. I'm not sure what compelled me to do it, but I got out of bed and started snooping around Mark's bunk. My jaw basically hit the floor when I found my Barcelona cap in his duffel bag. I dug around some more and found a bunch of my personal belongings that I didn't even know were missing. There was a nail clipper my mom had packed for me in there, along with my extra toothbrush, and most disturbingly, a pair of my underwear. I didn't know what to think. I was about to cry when I noticed something else in the bag. His notebook. Sometimes, even to this day, I still regret picking up that notebook. My middle school brain was not prepared for what was in there. It was completely filled with drawings, pencil drawings, some sketched so aggressively that there were holes in some of the pages. There were drawings of monsters, creatures, and things out of nightmares. There were really disturbing acts of violence drawn in there. People getting run over by cars, stabbed, mutilated, tortured. It was sick. Worse than sick, it was demonic. There was honest-to-God demonic shit in there. There were drawings of me in there. The image that was never and will never leave my brain is a drawing of me on a cross with my legs missing. The last few pages were basically all of me, and one of the pages was just my name, scribbled 100 times. It makes me sick thinking about everything I saw in there, and there's stuff I haven't even mentioned. The last page was the worst. My name was at the top of the page in big letters, and below it were 4 words I'll never forget. I'll do it tomorrow. When everyone got back home, I got Greg's dad alone and told him about what was going on in a low voice while my friend started a movie in the living room. He didn't believe me until I showed him Mark's notebook, which I could tell he found equally disturbing. He didn't know what to do. He told me to put everything back the way I found it. I didn't want to, but he was the adult, and I couldn't tell him no. As I was putting the notebook back, I made a split-second decision and tore one of the pages out. Meanwhile, Greg's dad then ran out to the living room and told everyone there was a family emergency and that we had to end the trip early. As we were frantically packing our things, I could feel Mark's eyes burning a hole in my back. I was scared to look at him. We pulled out of the driveway, caught the first ferry off the island, and drove the whole way back without stopping once. Greg's dad dropped Mark off first, then James. James and Greg lived on the same street, so he let Greg out of the car with James. As we were driving to my house, Greg's dad told me that he'd talked to Mark's parents, and that it was best that I not mention anything to my parents. Greg and Mark's families were really close, so I guess that made sense. When I got home though, I couldn't last 10 minutes. I broke down crying to my parents and told them everything. They were furious and called the police in the same minute. My parents were also outraged that Greg's dad would try to sweep something so serious under the rug. Things get a little fuzzy after that. I remember crying again while telling the police what happened. When they asked for proof, I was able to show them the page I ripped out of Mark's notebook. Apparently, that was enough. The police obtained a warrant and actually found the notebook. My items were all returned except for my pen, which the police were never able to find. My parents didn't tell me much about how things went, but I never saw Mark again. His family moved, and he never showed up to school again. I never hung out with Greg again either. The reason I'm writing this now is because last week, I received an anonymous letter in the mail. It said I remember everything, and wrapped inside the envelope was the pen Mark had stolen from me all those years ago. I have no idea how he found my address or why it's taken him so long to reach out. I'm honestly considering switching apartments. If anyone has any advice about my situation, I'd greatly appreciate it. This story is fresh in my mind since it literally happened last week as I'm writing this. My extended family is odd. I won't get into it, but basically everyone is either a gun nut, avid hunter, or both. Most families go on vacation in the summer. Mine tends to go around winter time. We don't go on typical vacations though. Every season, the adults chip in and rent a house for a week in some random location, usually in the woods. This time around it was a cabin in Vermont. I say cabin, but it was more like a castle. It had to be to accommodate all of us. Now comes the strange part. We play a lot of weird games as a family. Most of them involve shooting to some capacity. Here's the weirdest one. On the second to last night, all the adults gear up in warm clothing and venture outside into the woods for a massive game of laser tag. I know how ridiculous this sounds, believe me. I'm no stranger to people walking out of my life because of my family. The winner every year gets to claim a pretty decent prize pot and a ton of bragging rights. Plus, we played with this really cool industrial-grade set my Uncle Lucian made. He was the most gung-ho about this whole thing. The rules were simple. It was every man for himself, and the last person tagged won. If there were multiple people left by midnight, the prize was split. Once you got tagged, you made your way to the fire pit outside the house. Once the second to last person made it back, everyone would fire rounds into the air to let the last person left know they had won. I had just turned 18, so this was literally my first time being allowed to play. I'd be lying if I told you I wasn't psyched to play, not even for the money, but just because it seemed fun. As we were about to make our way outside, Lucian made sure we all knew how the equipment worked and where to keep our markers so the game would be fair. Then he told all of us to set a 10-minute timer on our phones so we'd know when to begin. Then, without warning, he turned and sprinted into the woods, like he was running a track race. My relatives followed suit, spreading in all directions. I noticed that most of them had run uphill, so I figured going downhill would give me a better shot at lasting longer. It was dark, but the snow on the ground made things pretty visible. I can't remember how many of us were playing, but it was a lot. At least 10 of my cousins and a couple sets of parents, including mine. Our family's pretty huge. After venturing deep into the forest, I found a little perch where I could see decently far up the hill, so I figured I'd wait there and catch my breath. I sat there for a decent while, trying to think of what to do. I figured if I kept walking adjacent to the slope, I could eventually work my way upwards and maybe flank whoever was still up there, so that's what I did. I must have walked along the slope to the left for 15 minutes straight, putting as much distance between me and the house as possible. Time really wasn't an issue, as there were still about 2 hours until midnight. I started walking up the slope. Just then, I heard a very faint crunching sound over my left shoulder, in the direction facing opposite my uncle's house. I jumped behind the nearest tree, praying whoever it was couldn't get a clean shot off. After a few seconds, I looked in the direction of the sound, but didn't see anything. And then, after straining my eyes, I saw it. A very faint, almost unnoticeable trail of footprints way off in the distance. They led to a thick tree about 15 yards behind me. There was someone standing behind that tree. I was positive of it. And then it hit me. Why hadn't they just tagged me? I was clearly out in the open, oblivious to their presence, and they were clearly trying to sneak up on me. I started running up the hill, hoping to get out of range before they could get a shot off. I was just about to continue back to the right towards the house when I noticed something. Further off to the left was another set of footprints. This one was weird though. It started from deeper in the woods, came towards me, and looped back into the forest. Had someone been outflanking even me? They would have had to walk further into the woods than I had, which I found pretty hard to believe. Before I could keep thinking, I heard something from the slope I had just run up. It sounded like a person falling into the snow. I continued running, this time back toward the house. I pulled out my phone. It was past 11. I couldn't believe an hour had already gone by. I kept running and stumbled upon a path of footprints heading towards the house. They looked fresh, so I picked up the speed, hoping to catch someone off guard. I passed a line of trees and saw my cousin Corbo walking at a steady pace, laser gun in hand. I crouched and pulled out my pistol. I nailed his marker and it started blinking. He slammed his fist against a tree before shaking his head and continuing towards the house. I grinned, thrilled to have actually gotten a kill. High on the adrenaline, I decided to hatch a plan to get the jump on the person stalking me. I sprinted ahead for another minute, then doubled back until I could safely jump behind a tree without leaving an obvious trail. It was flawless. There was no way anyone following my footprints would know I was hiding there. As I was waiting there, my marker started blinking out of nowhere. I was pissed. The beam was coming from where I had just been. It was definitely whoever was stalking me. I stood up, expecting whoever had just shot me to turn their laser off. They didn't though. The beam stayed trained on me, which actually started to get on my nerves. It felt like they were taunting me. I wanted to know who had been behind me that whole time, so I started walking in the direction of the beam. They never stopped shining their laser at me, even as I began closing in. All I could see were their hands. The rest of their body was standing behind a tree. Just then, I heard a bunch of gunshots sound off behind me, making me jump. I froze. Impossible. I must have won. Corbo must have been the final kill. But then who in the world killed me? I kept staring at the thin beam of light that was still pointing at me, and then the person holding the laser gun stepped out from behind the tree. It was a stranger. Even worse, there were two of them, standing side by side. Just then, I heard a crunch from behind me. I whipped my head around to see a man in a ski mask holding a trash bag in one hand and a knife in the other. He noticed me staring at him and started sprinting toward me. I ran, ditching my gear and screaming at the top of my lungs. I could hear all three of them chasing me, yelling things that I didn't even think were English. I zipped past the trees and ran as fast as I could through the snow, praying to God I didn't trip. They were gaining on me. I didn't want to turn around, but I knew they were right on my heels. Finally, I could see the lights of the house in the distance. I kept screaming and running, feeling my legs starting to give out. I was so close to the clearing, and that's when I saw Lucian sprinting toward me, hunting rifle in hand. He aimed above my head and fired 3 shots into the air. I heard whoever was behind me trip before running back into the woods. I collapsed at Lucian's feet, desperate for air. I literally passed out from exhaustion right there in the snow. The next morning was rough. My aunt explained that she had tripped at one point during the game and later realized she had dropped her laser gun, which explained how the guys in the woods had one. Corbo had tagged 6 of my relatives before I found him, which is why he was so upset when I got him. It turned out that he was in fact the last kill. Lucian and my dad had run out into the woods with their guns, but couldn't find a thing. They tried following the footprints, but there were so many branching paths and dead ends they eventually gave up. That whole day was a blur. The adults contacted the owners of the house, and we also reported everything to the police. The next morning, I woke up to yelling coming from downstairs. Lucian was losing it, yelling toward the woods at the top of his lungs. I ran down to find a single snowman facing the house. In its hand was the laser gun my aunt had dropped. Lucian fired a few rounds into the snowman's head before shouting some more threats and storming inside. It's only been about a week, but I'll send an update if I hear anything. When I was in college, I couldn't afford the extravagant spring break vacations to Mexico that all the Greek life people went on. Because of this, I spent my first 3 spring breaks on campus, which I actually didn't mind too much. By the time spring break rolled around my senior year though, I realized that it was basically my last chance to get the spring break experience I'd been missing out on. Mexico was still out of the question since I'd still be paying everything myself. Eventually, my girlfriend Allie found a decently priced Airbnb that sounded pretty appealing. We figured we could turn it into a couple's getaway of sorts, so we invited her best friend Laya and her boyfriend Calvin. We were all super excited since we had never been on a vacation together before. The place we had picked wasn't your typical spring break Airbnb though. It was nestled in a really secluded woodsy area in Lake County, California. There was a hot tub, an exposed fireplace, an antique-style record player, and some cots for stargazing outside. It was honestly perfect. The place was about 2.5 hours away, so we'd get a nice and relaxing drive on the way. Unfortunately, Calvin drove a really cramped Mini Cooper, meaning the girls had to squeeze into the back seat. He was honestly pretty insecure about his car and would get annoyed when one of us would make a comment about it, which was a pretty funny detail. As terrible as that car was, it was a drop top, which was really nice. We pulled in around 8 p.m. after it was already fully dark out. I can't even lie, the place looked a little scary late at night with all the lights off. When I say it was in the woods, I mean it. The trees blocked the view of all but one of the neighboring houses. The first night was really chill. We hung by the fireplace with a bottle of wine and played some board games. We wanted to go in the hot tub, but Calvin was complaining, so we didn't. He was honestly being pretty pouty for some reason, but we all just assumed there was something on his mind. The next night was better. We convinced Calvin to join us in the hot tub for some drinking games. The hot tub was connected to the back of the house, but inside its own little room, the walls of which were just screens. We were playing Never Have I Ever with some music blasting, having a lot of fun. We were all more than a little buzzed at that point, and just then though, a flash of bright light lit up the spa room. If it had been raining, we would have assumed it was lightning, that's how bright it was. I quickly turned the music off, and the 4 of us stared at each other, nervous to say anything. I quietly got out of the hot tub and made my way from the spa room to the back deck. I looked out into the woods, but it was too dark to see anything. Out of nowhere, I started hearing a clicking sound coming from the woods. A few seconds later, I heard another one from a different direction, and then a whistling sound started up. The sounds kept coming, clicking and whistling from too many directions to keep track of. I yelled for Calvin and the girls to run inside, and I followed them into the house. the four of us huddled in the living room, not sure of what to do. I thought maybe it was a dumb prank or someone messing with us, which is why we didn't call the police right away. A few minutes later, though, someone started banging on the front door. The girls were hysterical, so I told Calvin to call the police while I grabbed the biggest knife in the kitchen, ready to protect everyone should it come to that. I yelled in a deep voice that I had a gun, which was obviously just a bluff. The banging stopped. Calvin said the police were on the way, but out there in the middle of nowhere, they could have been miles from us. We waited in silence for a few minutes. It was the tensest moment of my life. Just when we thought the nightmare was over, one of the living room windows shattered. Someone had thrown a massive rock through it. The girls screamed, and I told everyone to run upstairs and lock the door. I stayed downstairs, bracing myself for a fight. By some miracle, no one came charging through the window. Eventually, I ran over to inspect the window and noticed there was a piece of paper taped to the rock that had been thrown. Scribbled in black ink were the words, "Go away, you shouldn't be here." The police arrived shortly after and did a thorough search of the property. They of course found nothing. We weren't sticking around to wait for them though. We were packed up and out of there that night. The Airbnb hosts actually ended up giving us a refund, although they refused to talk about the situation. My girlfriend thinks there's something the owner wasn't telling us. Maybe she's right. I guess that could explain why the place was so cheap. Either way, I don't think I'll be taking any vacations or using Airbnb anytime soon. Hopefully I don't dox myself by writing this, but I'm a graffiti artist, or as some might see it, a delinquent. I'm fine with either title. Point is, I like to spray paint, and I'm decent with a can in my hand. The tagging community is atrocious. People aren't friendly, and there's no respect between artists. Because of this, I've adopted a much more inconspicuous routine. I like tagging up quieter spots, where my art likely won't be seen by other artists or the general public. Old train lines are usually a good bet, since the train cars are endless and new trains get decommissioned and left to rot on them all the time. My friend Lucas likes to come with me when I tag up, even though he's not big into the whole thing himself. I welcome the company. Some people don't understand the importance of a good friend, and I think that's sad. Most of my other friends don't seem to respect my time or interests as much as he seems to. Lucas and I found ourselves smoking on some nameless set of old tracks I found earlier that day on Google Maps. I'm not a big stoner myself, but he smokes a lot of weed, so I often indulge to match his vibe. It wasn't that late, maybe a little past 10 p.m. We finished a J and talked as we walked alongside the old, rusty freight train. Oddly enough, there wasn't a single tag on the entire train. It must have been recently moved here, I thought, excited that I'd get first dibs on such a good surface. I tossed Lucas a can for him to mess around with, and I started doing my own thing. About 5 minutes later, I finished my first tag. I admired it for a bit before moving to the next car, then the next. About 15 minutes and 2 paint cans later, I had 3 decent tags up adjacent to one another, and I was pretty proud of myself for how they looked in combination with each other. Sorry in advance if this offends anyone, but I tend to discard my empty cans wherever they go dry. So I flung them back the way we had come, enjoying the satisfying clattering sound a ball bearing makes when bouncing around the inside of an empty can. I then caught up with Lucas, who had seemingly rolled and lit another joint, neglecting the paint I had given him. For context, the reason I'm not a big stoner is because I started getting unbearable anxiety highs much more frequently, maybe 90% of the time. In hindsight, smoking 2 J's with Lucas was a borderline detrimental decision. After all, we were doing something illegal, which was already pretty anxiety-inducing. I smoked the second joint anyway, confident that I'd be okay. As soon as the final sparks floated off the J, that's when we heard it. A muffled clang from somewhere behind us rang out into the night. The two of us froze and stared into the darkness. I could feel droplets of sweat forming around my neck as adrenaline began coursing through me. I couldn't tell if the sound had come from outside of the train or from inside one of the cars. It was hard to tell which option was worse. We waited for a full minute in silence, and nothing. That's when I whipped out my phone and recorded this video.
Bro, what the fuck was that? What the fuck? Fuck!
As the video shows, whoever made that noise picked up one of my empty paint cans and threw it at us, before chasing and shouting at us. You can't really see the paint can in the video, but I swear to you, that's what the first sound was. As we frantically made our escape, whoever was behind us yelled, "You better not trip, boy." A few seconds later, an actual gunshot sounded off behind us, almost causing Lucas to trip and fall. It startled me so much that my finger slipped off the record button on Snapchat and the video cut out. We bolted down the tracks until they intersected a main road and didn't stop running until we were a safe distance away. I don't think I've ever been more terrified in my entire life. It didn't help that I was stoned out of my mind. My hands were literally shaking. So were Lucas's. We found our way back to the car and drove home in silence. What was I supposed to do? Call the police? I was literally breaking the law. That wasn't an option. The story doesn't end there, though. I actually went back to those tracks a few weeks later, but this time during the day and equipped with my trusty Glock 17. To my surprise, the train was still there. Despite that, there was a pretty glaring difference this time around. In the 3 spots where my tags had previously been were now ugly blotches of red paint. Someone had deliberately covered my work. Quietly, I kept investigating and eventually came to a train car with its door wide open. I took a look inside, and it was bizarre. The train car was completely empty, except for a chair in the direct center and what looked like ropes and chains scattered about. Some of the ropes were wrapped around the legs of the chair, and others were just lying on the floor. The weirdest part was the smell, though. The whole car smelled like bleach. If you closed your eyes, you would have guessed you were in a cleaning supply closet. I can't overstate the smell, though. It literally smelled like the whole train car had been doused in bleach. I went to take a picture of the scene when I thought I heard a metal clang somewhere further down the train. I could have imagined it, but I wasn't taking any chances. That was enough for me. I was out of there as quickly as I had come. I've told so many people this story, and none of them could rationalize that psycho's actions in a way that makes sense. I doubt a homeless person would be able to get their hands on a gun, but I can't fathom why someone other than a homeless person would respond so aggressively, and why they decided to cover up my tags is another mystery. I think the most disturbing aspect of this whole thing was the chair in the middle of the train car. I really want to go back to those tracks just to take a picture of what I saw, but I haven't worked up the courage to. I have no idea if whoever was there that night was really shooting to kill us or just trying to scare us. But sometimes, late at night, when it's just me and my thoughts, I can still hear that shot ringing in my ears. As I'm writing this, it's early July. This story took place at the beginning of summer. I usually try to hang around my college town or travel to Europe in the summer as a way to avoid going home, but that wasn't a possibility this time around. I found myself reluctantly returning home at the beginning of the summer. I just had to make it through 1 week, and then I'd be on a plane to Germany. I didn't really feel like seeing any of my old friends, but I wasn't too keen on staying home either. So I found myself waking up early and spending my entire days hiking, watching movies, or even just driving around aimlessly. It was my last day home. I was getting bored of the stuff I had been doing and wanted to do something a little more exciting. My friends and I used to train hop, one of the many unruly activities that I had since cut out of my life. I decided what the hell and drove to a secluded set of tracks I knew about. Freight trains always passed through here, so I knew there would be many options. The tracks were surrounded by trees and various flora, part of the reason I had chosen them. The last thing I needed was to be caught for doing an illegal activity after having been clean for so many years. I parked my car and made my way over to the tracks. Let me describe the layout so it's easy to understand. This specific set of tracks ran through the trees for a while before entering a tunnel. There was a very small clearing on the other side of the tunnel and then a massive bridge over the water. My friends and I used to ride the train all the way across the bridge, but since it was just me, I would have no way of getting back to my car unless I felt like walking 10 miles. So I decided that I'd hop on the train and take it through the tunnel, hop off, and get a peaceful walk back to my car. I walked along the tracks and waited for a train to pass. It was probably 2 or 3 in the afternoon. Finally, after about 10 minutes of walking, I started to feel the familiar vibration in the rails. I quickly ran to the side and tried my best to stay out of sight. Usually, as far as I know, freight train conductors didn't care enough to report people walking along the tracks, but I didn't want to take any chances. The train passed, and I waited for a good amount of cars to go by before emerging from my hiding spot. I picked a car that looked easily attainable and began jogging alongside the train like I had done 100 times before. Once I was confident enough, I grabbed hold of the ladder and swung myself up. It was pretty easy. The train wasn't traveling very quickly. As my part of the train was about to enter the tunnel, I saw a strange flash of light from up ahead. I assumed it was a spark from the train or something, but truth be told, I had never seen anything like it before. I hoped there wasn't an errant wire or something dangerous in the tunnel, but it was too late to hop off. The train started picking up speed since the tunnel was perfectly straight, and I closed my eyes as the adrenaline rush started coming on. Just then, I felt a hand reach out from the darkness and literally grab my leg. I lost my footing and nearly slipped, but my hands were firmly gripping the train. I screamed and kicked, but the train sped by before I could make contact with anything. Before I could even comprehend what just happened, I felt another hand slap against my leg. I screamed again before scrambling up the ladder, hopefully out of reach. My heart was racing. What the hell just happened? The train exited the tunnel, and I hopped off without thinking. I waited for the train to completely pass and watched it chug over the bridge. I remember pacing back and forth in the little clearing, thinking about what just happened. Like, were there really people in the tunnel, and what could they possibly be doing there? Why the hell would they try to drag me down? All of these thoughts and more were racing through my mind when a stark realization struck me in the face. The only way back to my car was through the tunnel. There was absolutely no chance in hell I was walking back through that tunnel with those people in there, especially since they'd be able to see my silhouette and I'd be walking through darkness. I sat on the ground for what felt like forever. There was no other option. I couldn't walk across the bridge without risking my life. A train could come along at any second and the bridge was too long. I considered calling someone to come rescue me, but I wasn't even sure if they'd be able to do anything. Police weren't an option. I was breaking the law just being here. I had no choice. I picked up a rock and started making my way through the tunnel. There were 2 people in there, which I knew for a fact, but there could have been more. I had no idea. I got about halfway to the point where I felt the second set of hands when I heard something. A faint clicking was coming from somewhere in the tunnel. It sounded like a human clicking their tongue, but it could have been made by a machine. It was honestly hard to tell. I froze and thought to myself, continuing to walk this tunnel was a death sentence. I felt a rush of confidence and pulled out my phone. "You better stay back or I'll shoot," I threatened, my words echoing off the tunnel walls. There was a moment of silence. The clicking stopped as quickly as it had begun. I was obviously bluffing about having a gun, but I figured it was better to bluff than just walk in silence. I then pulled up a video on YouTube of a gunshot sound effect, turned up my phone's volume, and played it. It was honestly louder than I was expecting, and with the echo of the tunnel, I prayed to God that whoever was in there bought it. Without waiting another second, I sprinted full speed into the darkness, bracing myself for a fight. I didn't stop running until I had reached the other side. By some miracle, no one tried to grab me. After making it out of the tunnel, I looked back. There was another flash from deep in the tunnel. This time, though, it subsided long enough for me to clearly see 2 silhouettes standing on the tracks facing me. That was it for me. I turned to leave, but as I was jogging away, the nastiest screech I've ever heard emanated from the tunnel. It sounded barbaric, definitely human, but far from normal. I don't plan on ever train hopping again. The New York City subway system is a scary place. I've been an MTA worker for 7 years, and nothing really surprises me anymore. When friends and family ask if I have any stories, though, there is one that stands out among the rest, one that I can't explain. This happened to me about 2 years into the job, but I remember it like it was yesterday. I was pretty acclimated to everything at that point, and things had become routine. I was stationed in Brooklyn at the time, and I was doing some routine maintenance in High Street Station. There wasn't a soul on the platform. It was actually kind of eerie. You're used to these subway stations overflowing with people, so seeing them empty and almost deserted looking was a strange adjustment to make. I hadn't seen a person on the platform in hours, and it was dead silent except for the buzz of the lights and the occasional passing train. Out of nowhere, I heard a clang from somewhere down the track. It startled me so badly that I dropped my mop in shock. The sound wasn't something I was used to hearing. The best way I could describe it to you is that sound that a rock would make if it had been dropped on a metal rail. I stopped what I was doing and looked into the tunnel, listening for other noises. After a while, I concluded that whatever I heard had either been caused by an animal or a falling piece of cement. After all, these stations were pretty old. I went back to work, not thinking too much about the sound. About 10 minutes later, the same sound shook me from my concentration, only this time it was probably about twice as loud. This time, I actually became a little concerned, dare I say scared. Was it really possible that 2 chunks of the ceiling had fallen in the span of 10 minutes? I put down my supplies and walked over to the tunnel entrance, trying to be quiet. I peered into the darkness and couldn't really see anything. I debated whether or not it was a good idea to call out into the tunnel, and ultimately decided against it. I still figured it was nothing, but after the initial fear had worn off, I was more confused than anything. I kept trying to think of things that could make it sound like that, not once, but twice. It was especially bizarre since the second sound was louder. I tried to keep my mind off the sounds and went back to work, finding a good rhythm again. I was almost done with my work on this platform and was pleased that I'd get to leave this weird station soon. As I was wrapping things up, I heard something that gave me the chills. A child's voice called out for help from inside the tunnel, and he sounded like he was in distress. I instantly stopped what I was doing and made my way over to the edge of the platform. I hesitated for a few seconds before deciding that a child in anguish wasn't something my moral conscience would allow me to ignore. I walked down the steps leading onto the tracks and waited for my eyes to adjust to the darkness. I shouted into the tunnel, asking that kid if he was okay. No response. That's weird, I thought, starting to feel nervous about this encounter. Just then, the kid's voice rang out again, repeating his call for help. I yelled back, asking him if he could hear me. He responded yes, and I asked where specifically he was. There was a brief moment of silence before he just said, "In front of you. Just keep walking." I really didn't want to, but couldn't just leave some helpless kid all alone on those tracks. It was dangerous. I began walking forward when something dawned on me. I yelled into the darkness one more time, this time asking the kid what was wrong. An uncomfortable pause again before the kid responded, "Just keep walking." I didn't like that. This whole thing was off. My eyes finally adjusted to the darkness, and I was able to slightly make out what was in front of me. There actually was what looked like the shadow of a kid just up the tracks, but there was something else that almost made me scream in fear. Another shadow, this one much taller, obviously an adult. My blood ran cold, and I stopped in place. This wasn't happening to me. As slowly as I could, I turned around and made my way back to the platform. Luckily, I wasn't chased on the way back. The kid shouted, "Wait, where are you going?" once I reached the platform, but I wasn't sticking around another second. I made my way up the stairs and called the police as soon as I got cell service. I told them everything, and police were swarming the platform in a matter of minutes. I waited to see what they turned up. After about 20 minutes of searching, they did find something chilling. There was a single kid's shoe just lying in the tunnel, which the police hypothesized could have signified a struggle. After hours more of searching and scouring every available database for missing children, we were told we'd receive a call if anything ever came up. It was concluded that whoever had been down there, though, had hidden somewhere in the tunnels. I have no idea what to think of this experience. This is the best theory I can come up with. Some psycho kidnapped a child and forced him to yell for help in an attempt to lure some unsuspecting Good Samaritan into a trap. Or hell, maybe it's their own kid who they're raising to also be a psycho. I can't think of any other reasonable explanation besides this one, but if I'm right, I can only imagine what that kid must be going through. I love the sound of falling snow. It's kind of like watching lightning or seeing a shooting star. It's just one of those unique things you have no control over that doesn't always present itself, but when it does, it's a treat. I'm not really the hiking type, but when it's snowing out, I just can't help myself. We've all got those irresistible cravings. This happened during one of those snowy nights. I live in a woodsy area. It's not really in the woods per se, but it's close enough. If I wanted to access an expansive, dense forest, I'd only have to drive a few minutes. I didn't have any major obligations the next day, so it was either a Friday or Saturday. Probably a Saturday because I remember being slightly hungover from going out the previous night. It also wasn't supposed to snow that night, which I remember specifically because I have a habit of checking the weather obsessively during the winter months. I was sitting in my room reading a book when it just started snowing, abruptly, as if someone had just casually flipped a switch. I didn't even notice it at first, but by the time I realized what was going on, there was already a considerable amount of snow on the ground. Without thinking too much, I instantly knew what I wanted to do. Take a snow walk, so that's what I did. The spot I drove to is pretty secluded for the most part. It's a local hiking trail that usually doesn't see that much traffic. I stepped out, admired the snowfall for a few seconds, and started walking. I didn't really have a defined plan in my mind. My only objective was to get deeper into the woods so I could more fully appreciate the snow. After about 20 minutes of walking, I was finally satisfied with how far I'd gone. But then, the literal moment I stopped to appreciate the snow, I heard something. Something that definitely didn't belong there. It was a child's voice. It took me a few moments to even process what I heard. Just as I was telling myself my mind was playing tricks on me, I heard it again. The sound of a little boy yelling, "Hi." I know that sounds pretty benign, but it was just so freaky in the moment. It was quite literally the last thing I was expecting to hear out there, all alone in those woods. The other unsettling thing about it was that I couldn't really tell where the voice had come from. It sounded like it could have come from a number of different directions, if that makes any sense. I whipped my head around, but there was no one there. I kept looking around frantically, but there was no one in sight. Just as I was about to head back to my car, I heard the voice again. It was definitely a little boy's voice, only this time, he said, "Up here, silly." Without even processing how freaky of a thing that is to say, I instinctively looked up, and there he was. There was a little boy who looked to be around 9 years old just sitting on a tree branch in a tree not too far away. It was the most bizarre thing. The boy was clearly bundled up for the cold, but how he managed to climb that tree, I had no idea. The lowest branch to the ground was at least 20 feet off the ground. Strangely, seeing him kind of calmed me down a little. It was almost like I had been afraid of not knowing where he was, as opposed to him being there. I walked over to the tree he was sitting on, keeping my eyes on him the entire time. He was smiling this really wide grin that reminded me of the expression someone who hadn't learned to smile yet would make. My sense of security started disappearing the more I looked around, though. For starters, there wasn't a single footprint around the tree he was sitting in, meaning he had climbed up there before it had started snowing, meaning he had been sitting in that tree for at least 45 minutes. And that's not even mentioning the fact that he figured out a way to climb that thing in the first place. Like I said, it would have been exceedingly difficult to do so, even if you had climbing experience. The tree was perfectly straight. He would have had to shimmy up 20 feet. He waved at me, and I didn't waste a second. I asked him how he got up there, and he told me it was a secret. Then he just went back to smiling that awful grin. I didn't know what to do. This kid clearly didn't belong out there, and I felt compelled to do something. But what was I supposed to do? Try and climb the tree to get him down? Before I could think of something to say, he stood up straight on the branch he had been sitting on and said, "Watch this." Then without warning, he leaned back and fell. He fell what must have been at least 30 feet. I screamed. There was nothing else I could do. I watched in horror as he landed directly on his back with a gruesome thud. I thought he was dead. There's no way any amount of snow could have cushioned that fall. I ran over to him, but before I could reach him, he sprung up off the ground and started running away from me. It was impossible. Falling from that height should have been enough to kill him. I screamed again, this time out of shock, and I watched as he ran off deeper into the woods. Even with the bright snow on the ground, it was still dark enough for him to run out of sight. I don't know what came over me. Instead of doing the rational thing and turning around, I ran after him. I don't know why. I know myself. If a situation like that were to arise again, I'd turn around 99 times out of 10. But I guess this was just that one time. That's the only explanation I can come up with. I regained my composure and started following his footprints, knowing he couldn't have gotten far. After a few seconds of running, I started to hear him laughing. Cackling is a better word, honestly. It was really unsettling. It was like he was toying with me, playing a game while I was out there scared to death. His footprints passed a nearby tree, and as I was running past, I felt something latch onto my back. Before I could react, I was tumbling to the ground, and this kid was on top of me, clawing at my neck and shoulders. I started screaming and blindly grabbed at him, but he wasn't letting go. He started wailing too, and I could feel myself starting to bleed. He was tearing into my neck with his fingernails, and I thought he was going to blind me. I managed to stand back up, and with all my strength, I flung him over my shoulder. He hit the ground, immediately got up, and ran deeper into the woods, still laughing. This time I didn't chase him. If it weren't for the cuts on my neck and the blood on my hands, I might have just stood there forever. The cuts didn't feel that deep, but there was an uncomfortable amount of blood. I hadn't been wearing a scarf, so I pulled off my hat and wrapped it tightly around my neck. My hands were shaking and soaked with my own blood, and I was having a panic attack. The next 20 minutes are really fuzzy, probably because I was so terrified and I had lost so much blood. The next thing I remember is being in the back of an ambulance, and then after that, I remember talking to some police officers about what happened. I got the medical attention I needed and was asked to recount my story like 10 times. At the time, I didn't realize what was so unbelievable about it. I would only later learn that while I had been in the hospital, the police had searched the area and found nothing. What's worse, they allegedly followed my footprints and only found the one set, mine. I remember being so emotionally distraught when I found that out. I was furious at the thought that they hadn't searched the woods thoroughly. But why would they lie? By the time I was discharged from the hospital and done talking to police officers, I didn't have much energy to do anything other than sleep. I can't remember if this was the day after or 2 days after. Like I said, things got a bit fuzzy, but I eventually went back to that hiking trail. It had snowed considerably since then, so it wasn't too surprising to find that my footprints had been snowed in. I searched the entire forest. It must have taken me hours, but there was no sign anyone had been there. This is still one of the freakiest things that has ever happened to me or anyone I personally know. This happened over winter break my sophomore year of college. I was 19 and had the house to myself for a little under 2 weeks. During the second week, a massive snowstorm hit. The forecasts were predicting something crazy, and they definitely weren't lying. By the time I woke up that Saturday, there was already close to a foot on the ground, and it was still coming down hard. Plows couldn't keep up, and by late afternoon, the roads were basically impassable. I should mention that my neighborhood isn't your typical suburban setup. The houses are pretty spread out, and there's a lot of wooded areas between properties. It's nice in the summer, but in the winter it can feel kind of isolated. That day, with the snow piling up and no cars on the road, it felt even more so. I was bored out of my mind by like 6 p.m. The Wi-Fi knocked out while I was sleeping, so I couldn't even pass the time by playing video games or anything. For context, my only hometown friend is this guy named Ryan, and I knew he was around because I had literally hung out with him the day before. So while I was dying of boredom in my room, I got this idea that I thought was hilarious at the time. I was going to walk to his house and surprise him. The roads were undrivable, sure, but I figured I could make it on foot. It was only about 1.5 miles, maybe a little more. I'd walked further than that plenty of times. Looking back, it was a pretty stupid idea, but I was 19 and bored and thought it would be funny to just show up on his doorstep covered in snow. The first part of the walk was actually kind of nice. The snow had stopped falling by then, and everything was covered in this thick white blanket. The streetlights made everything glow, and it was weirdly peaceful. I could hear my own breathing and the crunch of my boots, but that was about it. There wasn't a living thing out there. About halfway there, the route cuts through this stretch where there aren't any houses for a while, It's mostly just trees on both sides of the road and a few empty lots. During the day, it's nothing special, but that night, especially with all that snow, it felt different. That's when it really hit me how alone I was. It was a really strange feeling. I kept walking, and out of nowhere, I saw headlights up ahead. The lights were pretty far off, but they were coming from the direction I was headed. I stopped walking and watched them get closer. It was definitely a snowplow, and it was moving really slowly. But then out of nowhere, it suddenly veered hard to the right, like the driver had lost control or was trying to avoid something. I watched them cut across the road and disappear into the tree line. There was this muffled crunching sound, and then everything went quiet again. My first thought was that someone had just crashed, so I started running toward where I'd seen the lights go off the road. The snow was deep, and I couldn't move that fast. But the only thing on my mind was the thought that someone was hurt and needed help. It took me a few minutes to reach the spot. I could see where the vehicle had gone off the road, so I followed the tire tracks until I found it. The scene looked exactly as I predicted. A snowplow with its front end crumpled and smashed into a tree. Its headlights were still on and the engine was still running. I ran up to the driver's side, preparing myself to have to lift someone through the snow, but when I got to the window and looked inside, there was no one there. The driver's seat was empty. I stood there for a second, not really processing what I was seeing. I thought maybe the driver had been thrown from the vehicle or something, so I looked around. The windshield wasn't shattered though, so they must have still been inside the plow. I checked the passenger side, but that seat was also empty. I ended up pulling the driver's door open in frustration, thinking maybe they had slumped down below the steering wheel, but there was no one there either. It took me a few seconds to realize that the entire plow was empty. There was quite literally nowhere else someone could have been. I remember just standing there in the snow, staring at this wrecked snowplow with its headlights still on and its engine still running, feeling like something was very, very wrong. There were no footprints leading away from the truck. Whoever had been driving the thing had just vanished. It's hard for me to describe what I felt next. I got this sudden, overwhelming sense that I needed to leave. It wasn't a thought so much as a feeling, like something in my gut was forcing me to get out of there. I trusted my gut and backed away from the plow. As I was walking back the way I had came, I heard a voice ring out from somewhere behind me. It was a man's voice, and he was yelling for help. I wanted to turn around and help. That was my goal in the first place, but every instinct I had was screaming at me to keep moving. I started running, and as I got further away, I heard the voice yell out one more time. It sounded much closer the second time, like impossibly close. No one could have moved that fast through such deep snow. I didn't turn around. I ran the entire rest of the way to Ryan's house. The joke was pretty much ruined at that point. I must have looked insane when his mom answered the door. I explained what happened, and Ryan's dad ended up calling the police. In the time it took the police to get out there and back amidst all that snow, Ryan and I had gone back and forth about what I'd seen probably a dozen times. He kept asking if maybe I imagined it, or if maybe the driver had walked away before I got there, but I knew for a fact that my eyes hadn't been playing tricks on me. When the police got to Ryan's house, they revealed something horrifying. Apparently they hadn't found any tire tracks on that round at all. They had searched the entire road, but there was no sign that a plow had ever even been there. The officer actually accused me of making the entire thing up, and I had to argue my case. I was practically begging them to believe me. The officer ended up just leaving, and there was nothing I could do about it. I stayed at Ryan's that night. I didn't want to walk back home in the dark, and honestly, I don't think I could have even if I wanted to. The next morning, after the plows had finally cleared the roads, Ryan's dad drove me home. I've thought about that night a lot since then, and every time I do, I come to the unfortunate conclusion that what happened to me is just one of those unexplainable things. I guess it's possible that I hallucinated the whole thing, but that terrifies me just as much. I'm Sebastian, and I go by Sebi. This happened back when I was a sophomore in high school, about 7 years ago now. I went to a private school in a nearby city, which meant I had to commute on public transportation every day. Train in the morning, train in the afternoon. It sounds tedious, but honestly I didn't mind it. Most of my friends lived in the same general area, so we'd all ride together, and it became this social thing where we'd just hang out and talk during the commute. One of the hidden benefits of private school, honestly, getting people accustomed to commuting early in life. I was a runner back then, track in the spring, cross country in the fall. During the off-season, I'd catch the train right after school let out around 3, and it would be pretty empty, usually just the same group of high schoolers heading home. But during the season, practice wouldn't wrap up until after 5:30, which meant by the time I got on the train, it was packed with commuters heading back to the suburbs after work. Luckily, my two best friends Charles and James also ran track and lived on the same train line, so I wasn't completely alone during those late rides. One night after track practice, it started snowstorming the moment our train left the station. It was midwinter, so night is definitely the right term, even though it wasn't even 6 yet. And snowstorm is also the right term because it went from 0 to full-on blizzard in like 5 minutes. We found out while we were on the train that ours was the last one operating on that track. The forecast was predicting a massive storm, and they weren't letting any more trains leave the station after us. The snow only got worse. At one point, the three of us were genuinely wondering if the train was even going to make it to each of our stops, and even so, we quickly realized there was no way our parents could drive to pick us up. The roads were already a mess, so even if we made it to our respective stations, we'd have no choice but to walk home. For James and Charles, that wasn't a huge deal. They were practically next-door neighbors in a pretty lively, dense part of town, plus their houses weren't that far from the station. For me, though, it was different. My station was isolated. I'd have to cross a highway and then walk over a mile in this woodsy stretch to get home. I called my parents from the train and explained the situation. They told me I didn't have much of a choice. My dad told me to just suck it up, bundle up, and be careful. James and Charles got off at their stop, and I dapped them goodbye. The rest of the ride was just me and a handful of other passengers, and by the time we reached my station, I was the only one left. The doors opened and I stepped out onto the platform. It was completely empty, just me and a full blizzard. It was dark, but there was decent visibility because of the snow. Everything was white, and the light from the station reflected off of it in this pretty but eerie way. I stood there for a second, taking it in. It was a sight I had never seen before. Usually that station is bustling with cars and people, but with the snowstorm and all, it looked completely deserted. I started walking. There was no point in prolonging the inevitable. For whatever reason, I thought crossing the highway would have been more difficult, but there wasn't a single car anywhere in sight, including snowplows. I actually stopped and looked around, kind of in awe. It was beautiful in a weird way. I started thinking to myself I'd probably never experience anything like that ever again. After the highway, though, came the woods. The only other option was following the road home, but it was really windy and would have added a ton more walking, so I decided to just push through and walk through the woods. I don't know how long I'd been walking, but I happened to glance up after looking down at my feet for a while, and the moment I did, I had to hold back a yell. About 30 yards ahead of me, there was someone standing there, a man. He was facing me directly, almost like he knew the exact path I had to take. At first, my brain couldn't process what I was seeing, because he wasn't dressed for the weather at all. He was wearing a short-sleeved shirt and shorts in the middle of a blizzard, and to make things worse, his face was twisted in this deranged smile. I didn't move. I just stood there watching him, waiting to see what he was going to do. My mind was racing, trying to come up with some explanation, but the shock of the situation was too much for me to handle. I couldn't think or move, and in one abrupt motion, he went from smiling and standing still to screaming and charging at me. It was literal horror unfolding right in front of me. I snapped out of my haze and began running as fast as I could back the way I came, screaming for help even though I knew no one was out there. I couldn't move that fast with all the snow, and I felt him closing the gap with every second that passed. The chase felt like it lasted forever. It was probably 5 minutes, but it felt like an hour. I finally broke out of the woods and hit the road, and only then did I turn around. He was gone, and that didn't make me feel much better though. I felt physically sick. I followed the road home, and the whole time I kept thinking about my footprints, about how they were quite literally the only tracks in the snow. If that guy wanted to follow me home, it would have been the easiest thing in the world. When I finally got to my house, my parents were relieved. That is, until I told them what had happened in the woods. My dad wanted to go out and look for the guy, but my mom wouldn't let him. Several hours went by without incident. Eventually, my parents went to sleep. I pretended like everything was fine, but I was still freaking out internally. I couldn't get the image of his deranged smile out of my head. And the way he had been screaming was just so unnatural. And the more I thought about it, the more insane the whole thing felt. He had literally been wearing short sleeves. How had he not frozen to death out there? I was making myself crazy, so I forced myself to stop thinking about it and just go to sleep. But of course, I couldn't fall asleep. It was like I was in that 30-second shock after waking up from a nightmare, only instead of 30 seconds, it was several hours. That's the best way I can describe how I was feeling. At one point, I heard a tree branch rattle my bedroom window, which startled me out of bed. I went over to the window to see if I could dislodge it somehow. I pulled back the curtain and literally dropped to the floor, yelling. It was him, that guy from earlier. He was right there, inches from my window, only now I could see him clearly. His skin was purple, like he was freezing to death, and he was bald with this patchy gray beard. My dad burst into the room and just barely saw that guy through the window before he took off. My dad went to go run out in the snow, but my mom stopped him and convinced him to call the police instead, which he did. With all the snow on the grounds, it took the police forever to get to our house. By the time they did, that guy was long gone. My dad didn't care though. The police could have easily tracked his footprints in the snow, which is what I was expecting them to do. But once the officers realized the tracks led into the woods behind our house, they told us they couldn't just go tramping through the woods in the middle of the night. My dad got furious. He got in one of the officers' faces and almost made it physical. In the end, the officers literally left without doing a thing. Nothing ever came of it. The police never bothered to follow up, and I never saw that man again. For all I know, he froze to death somewhere behind my house. But for weeks after that, I was terrified to be in my own home. I still have absolutely no idea how to explain what happened.